This was never just a kiss. It was the collapse of a system built on silence. Arya Vance had spent her life being trained into invisibility. By wealth, by patriarchy, by a father who only acknowledged power when it served him. But in one shocking moment, a stranger named Lucian turned her from an expendable asset into a political threat. What makes this story devastating is not the scandal itself, but the truth beneath it. A daughter was being prepared as currency, and the first man to truly see her did so by detonating the ritual in public. This is a story about violence dressed as family, and rebellion disguised as desire.
Feels. From her first step, Arya Vance, the magnate's unacknowledged blood, existed as a paradox, a specter haunting the celebration, the living embodiment of a stain on the family's manufactured honor. Feels. Within the Hartley Grand Ballroom, a colosseum built for the gilded predator, she wore her practiced invisibility. It was a defense mechanism forged in the fires of her youth. But that night, the ecosystem shifted. A new hunter entered the arena, Feels. An apex predator whose gaze pierced the shadows and marked her as his territory. One dance, one look, one decision. The initial fissure before the entire construct of her world collapsed. For any who observe the coronation of the fallen, Feels, these moments are doctrine. Feels. The realization formed as she breached the doorway, a quiet act of defiance against a lifetime spent internalizing her own worthlessness. She held the thought, a singular truth locked within the architecture of her memory. Above, Feels. Chandeliers dripped light like sharpened, menacing crystals onto the mirrored floors. 300 figures, each wearing the uniform of dynastic wealth, smiled with their teeth, a pantomime of joy that never touched the coldness in their eyes. Feels. And undergirding it all, a Viennese waltz provided the soft, predatory soundtrack of inherited dominance. Feels. The atmosphere was thick with the scent of roses, champagne, and something else, that acute metallic odor she had long ago identified as money. Her hands performed a nervous ritual, smoothing the navy blue fabric of a dress chosen by her stepmother, Feels. Vivian. It was not so much a garment as it was a shroud, engineered to render her invisible. "This is the one you'll wear," Vivian's voice had decreed, her words carving a boundary. "The other gowns are for family." The subtext was a blade, Feels. She may carry the blood of Gregory Vance, the patriarch across the room, but she was not of their tribe. Feels. He did not acknowledge her entrance. In the public theater, he never did. A server moved through the crowd with a tray of champagne, his gaze lingering on her for a fraction too long, attempting to decipher the anomaly of her presence. In this world, Feels, a woman standing alone is either a monarch or a ghost. "No," Arya murmured, her voice soft. "Thank you." It was a tiny piece of the universe over which she could still claim dominion. She watched him present a glass to a woman draped in emerald, Feels, who accepted it without a glance, as if interacting with an automaton. Here the distinction between a person and an object was as fine as a razor's edge. Feels. Arya understood with perfect clarity which side of that line she occupied tonight. "My God, is that her?" The whisper was a projectile, deliberately aimed to be overheard from across the floor. She refused to turn, shifting only her eyes. Feels. 3 young women, among them her half-sister, Celeste Vance. "I can't fathom Vivian allowing her to come," another one hissed. Celeste's laugh was a delicate, cruel arrangement of notes. "Vivian is in a charitable mood," Feels. She insisted the girl needed a lesson in how the real world operates. Feels. She framed it as an education in reality. Their laughter was the sound of a cage door swinging shut. Arya's fingers tightened on her small clutch until her knuckles shone white. She forced the muscles to unclench. Feels. An act of discipline learned from a ghost. "They must never see your hands tremble," her mother's voice, as vivid as it was 4 years after the burial. "Stop standing in the center of the room," Celeste commanded as she swept by. Feels. Trailing a suffocating wave of perfume. "You are an embarrassment to us all." Arya complied, melting back toward the ballroom's perimeter, where the shadows were deep enough to consume a person whole. Feels. She found refuge against a cold marble pillar, fighting to regulate her breathing. Out for 4. A breathing exercise, a life that was no longer hers. It was then that Marcus materialized her field of vision like a scavenger drawn to the signal of distress, the feel of distress. He was somewhere in his 50s, with silvered hair and teeth, too perfect to be organic. One of her father's instruments. And he was moving directly toward her. Feels. "It is Miss Vance, is it not?" His gaze was a physical weight, traveling down her form and back up with a slow, appraising heaviness. "You have your father's eyes." "Thank you," Arya responded, her tone devoid of inflection. He made no move to leave. Heels. "Gregory neglected to mention you were attending." She explained it was an impulsive decision. He invaded her personal space, his presence a fog of scotch and cologne. "How old are you now, my dear? 21, maybe 22? 23, Heels, she corrected. 23, he echoed, like a bidder confirming a price, and unattached, a void of silence. "Well," he continued, pressing closer, bracing a hand on the pillar just beside her head. "Heels. If your father is failing to market you, perhaps he lacks the proper connections. I could facilitate some introductions." His hand drifted down the marble, his knuckle making deliberate contact with her bare shoulder. Heels. A current of ice shot through her system. She became paralyzed. "I'm quite all right, thank you," she articulated, the words a faint exhalation. "Are you?" he countered with a predator's smile. "You appear terribly isolated over here," I said. Heels. "I'm fine." The granite in her voice was a surprise even to herself. He registered it too. The charming facade fractured, exposing the raw sneer of a man denied his quarry. "You know," he purred, his voice descending into a more threatening register. Heels. "Girls in your predicament should learn to be more appreciative when a man offers his attention. Your market value is not exactly high, is it?" Her jaw throbbed from the pressure of her clenched teeth. Heels. She mentally scrolled through a catalog of calculated replies, each one with a specific consequence attached. But before a choice was made, the axis of the world shifted. The very atmosphere in the ballroom seemed to change. It began as a subtle thing, Heels, a realignment of the room's gravitational center as every person's focus converged on a single point. Heels. Laughter caught in people's throats. A waiter nearly lost his balance, his tray tilting precariously, and then she perceived it. A gaze incisive and of an impossible weight. She raised her head. There, Heels, on a balcony that commanded the entire floor, stood a man. He surveyed the room not as a participant, but as a sovereign observing his domain, silently assessing the value of every soul beneath him. He was tall, Heels, with shoulders that strained the seams of his dark suit. His face was a landscape of hard lines and sharp angles, as if carved from granite, and his eyes, even at this remove, were voids. He wore no tie. Heels. His entire being was a violation of the evening's code. Heels. He did not belong here. He was a wolf that had strayed into a meticulously curated flock of sheep. It was evident in his stillness, his profound calm, in the way the entire room's energy bent toward him without a single word exchanged. He was aware of it, Heels, and his focus was fixed, unwavering, upon her. "Are you even paying attention to me, Marcus?" She had erased him from her awareness. "Forgive me," she breathed, her own gaze locked on the balcony. "Who is that?" Marcus traced her line of sight, Heels, and the color vanished from his face. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. "Who is he?" "No one you need to know, sweetheart." Marcus took an abrupt, graceless step away from her. Heels. He adjusted his jacket, his gaze darting to every point in the room except the balcony. I need to find Gregory, if you'll excuse me." He escaped, propelled by the desperate energy of a man in flight for his life. Arya registered the data point. This figure on the balcony inspired pure terror in Marcus, a man who moments before had been performing the role of predator. She looked up again. He was gone. The balcony stood empty. For a brief moment, she wondered if he had been a hallucination. Heels, and then a presence directly behind her. He had offered no auditory warning. Within a vast hall of echoing marble teeming with 300 bodies, he had materialized from pure silence. Heels. His arrival was not heard but felt, an abrupt plunge in the room's temperature, a sudden density in the air at her back. "You gave the impression of needing a rescue," he remarked. The voice was a low timbre, Heels, a deep vibration that didn't ask for your attention, but simply took it. Arya remained facing forward. "I made no request for one." A beat of silence hung in the air. "No," he admitted. "You did not." Heels. His tone held the phantom of something that wasn't humor. It was far colder, the detached curiosity of a biologist examining a rare life form. When she at last pivoted, her gaze had to travel upward to find his. They weren't black as she'd first thought, Heels, but the gray of an impending storm, holding a kind of predatory stillness she'd only ever witnessed in images of deep-sea sharks. The eyes of a killer. It was an anomaly that had no place in the gilded ballroom. "Then I offer my apology," he said. Heels, inverting the power dynamic. "You didn't rescue me," she corrected, reasserting her agency. His response was a simple declaration of causality. "He walked away because he noticed me watching." When she pressed him for a reason, he offered none, feels, his gaze instead conducting a slow assessment of her features. Not with the predatory heat of Marcus, but with the cool, dispassionate appraisal of a man cataloging his possessions. Feels. The sensation was one of being spiritually dissected, a violation of her very soul. He saw her, not the dress, not the family name, but the fundamental part of her she'd spent 4 years interring, and he gave it a name. Then the hook, Feels. Because you were the sole individual in this room who had no desire to be here. She attempted to retreat into the collective, to make his observation general, but he refused the escape. A shadow of a smile touched his lips as he corrected her, Feels, twisting the blade deeper. They desire to be seen here. It is a different objective entirely. The precision of the analysis stole the air from her lungs, leaving her without a pre-written script. Then he demanded her name, Feels. A pause extended into a lifetime. The primal animal urge to lie, to flee this man, this apex predator, screamed through her, Feels. But the persona of Gregory Vance's daughter asserted itself. Aria Vance, she announced, the full name wielded as a shield. A minute flicker in his eyes, not recognition of her, she understood, but of the name, the currency it represented. Lucien Drave, Feels. He presented his own name without title or context, in the manner of a king who requires no introduction. He simply observed her, allowing the silence to do its work. The name itself was an unknown variable, Feels, but the reaction it produced in the room was a constant. An unseen current began to pull people away. An older woman altered her path mid-step. A man froze, his glass halfway to his mouth, staring, Feels. The reality of Lucien Drave was not a gradual discovery, but a sudden, suffocating certainty. He was a monument of power. You are an outsider, she observed, stating a self-evident truth. His response was an enigma wrapped in smoke, Feels. When she asked for specifics, from where, his answer was a philosophical evasion. Everywhere, in whom, an explanation explained nothing. He appraised her again, with an analytical gaze that didn't see a woman, Feels, but a complex variable in an equation. It was a dehumanizing sensation. It was also utterly compelling. Then came the edict, devoid of any pretense of a request. You will dance with me. She refused, Feels. Her justifications, a series of hastily erected defenses. His status as a stranger, her aversion to dancing, and finally, a desperate gesture toward the glittering assembly, an appeal to the unspoken rule that she was to remain a part of the scenery. Feels. Decreed by whom? He tilted his head, a flicker of authentic curiosity in his gaze. Whose rule is that? Everyone who holds any importance. Then their importance is an illusion. And with that he extended his hand. It was a large, Feels, well-proportioned hand, bisected by a fine, pale scar along the palm. It was long, it was old, her gaze was captured by it. Time itself seemed to halt. In the distance, the orchestra struck a new chord as the crowd, sensing a shift in the evening's gravity, Feels, began to turn. She understood. In that one silent, suspended beat of time, she understood that to take his hand was to detonate her life, leaving behind fragments that could never be reassembled, Feels. She also understood that there was no part of her that was not already fractured, Feels. She placed her hand in his. A single unified inhalation swept the room, the sound of 100 private worlds ceasing at once. Lucien Drave's grip was absolute as he guided her onto the floor. Aria Vance, Feels, the girl who had perfected the art of existing in the periphery, was now placed at the epicenter of her world. He laid a hand on her waist, enclosed hers in his other, and as the music began its ascent, Feels, he commanded the dance with a mastery forged in far more lethal arenas than a ballroom. You claimed you don't dance, he observed in a low murmur. I don't, and yet you are. Her answer was the quiet theorem of surrender. Feels, I am permitting you to do it for me. Feels. That phantom smile materialized once more. The tall man, he inquired, his voice was from the staircase. Aria had no need to look. My father. I see. Gregory Vance. I am aware. Feels. The inflection he gave the name compelled her to meet his eyes. You are acquainted with him. I am acquainted with his reputation. Is there a distinction? There is when the reputation belongs to him, Feels. The waltz was a slow orbit in a galaxy of spectators. Lucien maintained their isolation, a wide, empty moat of marble separating their world from the other dancers. It was a cordon of fear and deference, Feels. Aria could feel the weight of their scrutiny from every corner of the room, Feels. She could feel Celeste's glare, Vivian's, the predatory appraisal of the Marcus brothers, who were undoubtedly re-evaluating her market value. They are all looking at me, she whispered, as if waking from a dream. Indeed, Feels. I have attended this event a dozen times. No one has ever truly seen me. I know. How is that possible? He let the question hang in the air. His hand at her waist shifted, his thumb applying a single, heels, constant point of pressure against her spine, an anchor point in a maelstrom. Because my observation of you, he said, did not begin tonight. A deep elemental cold permeated her being, the kind that heralds absolute terror. What are you implying? Heels. I am implying this conversation requires a more private venue. Heels. I do not go to private venues with unknown men. It was a line from a script she had been taught, a rule from a world that had just ceased to exist. A wise policy, so why will you? Because I am not extending an invitation, he said, Heels, his voice devoid of warmth. I am issuing a warning. What I intend to do next will be flagrantly public and irrevocably loud, and you deserve the foreknowledge that after tonight your invisibility will be a memory. Heels. The implied violence of his words froze her. The music continued, but they had become a static sculpture at the heart of the swirling room as 300 guests feigned inattention. What is it you intend to do? She breathed. Whatever you permit me to. Heels. Another riddle. Heels. That is a recurring theme with you, because it is a recurring question you fail to answer. His eyes locked with hers, and for a microsecond the predatory mask softened before snapping back into place. Arya, he said, Heels, the name sounding as if it had been practiced. Tonight concludes in one of two ways. He was presenting a choice that was merely the illusion of one. Either you depart with your stepmother in that vehicle, and tomorrow, Heels, a man not unlike the one whose hand was on your shoulder an hour ago, will present your father with a figure, and your father will accept it. Heels. That is the first scenario. She had forgotten the mechanics of breathing. And the second, I kiss you, he stated, in full view of every person in this ballroom. And tomorrow, every one of them understands that you are no longer on the market. Heels. The world shifted on its axis. A sudden savage clarity crashed over her as disparate fragments of memory overheard whispers. Her father's anxious new associates, the deliberate choice of this dress, fused into a single monstrous revelation. Heels. She was not attending as a daughter tonight. She was an asset being showcased. Heels. How could you know this? She whispered. Because I am a man who monitors the architecture of such transactions. And this, your proposition? What is this? A superior transaction. For whom? The ghost of his smile returned, for us both. Her hand, Heels, forgotten inside his, developed a tremor, a delayed physiological response to terror. And if I refuse, she asked, her voice a thin thread, then I will walk away, and your evening will conclude as it was always designed to. You would allow that. Heels. I would. Why? Because it is not my business, he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial depth, to acquire women who have not chosen their own chains, the most insidious lie of all, the pretense of a choice. Heels. She studied his face for a long count, searching for the deception, for some fault line in the seamless predatory composure. There was nothing. Yet the absence of a lie was not the proof of a truth. This was a chess match. She grasped that much, Heels, even if the entire board remained obscured. What she could see with a terrifying lucidity was the alternative, the cold, clinical transaction her own family had engineered for her. It was a decision between a predictable, Heels, sanctioned damnation, and a future bound to one who was exponentially more powerful and infinitely more perilous. After 4 years of strategic silence and submission, a profound weariness had set in. Heels. Proceed, she said, the 2 words a formal declaration of surrender. His subsequent actions were measured, ritualistic. He moved his hand from her waist to her jawline, framing her face in a gesture of unmistakable ownership. Heels. Acting with the quiet confidence of a man for whom victory was a foregone conclusion. He tilted her face toward his. He paused, his lips a breath from hers, granting her a final silent opportunity to retreat. This was not an act of kindness, Heels. It was the final exhibit of his power, of his absolute dominion over her next action. Heels. She saw the escape route he presented, and she willed it shut. He kissed her. The act was neither gentle nor cruel. It was a statement of claim, executed with deliberate slowness for the benefit of 300 pairs of eyes, a string quartet, Heels, and the man who had been her father for 23 years. His palm was a warm brand against her skin. His mouth tasted of smoke and something else, something ancient and complex. Her own hand, acting on some latent instinct, rose to his chest. Heels. Through the fine material of his shirt, she could feel the rhythm of his heart. It was slow, impossibly slow, the calm metronomic beat of a strategist solving a final difficult variable. Heels. From across the opulent room, a woman's sharp audible gasp, Nearer, the unmistakable crash of a glass shattering on marble. Lucian ended the kiss, but not the intimacy. No, his forehead remained pressed to hers for another suspended moment. Heels. In that instant, with the entire ballroom's attention focused on them and the orchestral score disintegrating into silence, he breathed a single directive intended only for her. Breathe, Arya. She hadn't been aware that oxygen had abandoned her. Heels. She took a ragged, desperate breath. He straightened, disengaging with an agonizing deliberation, unlacing his fingers from hers with the same devastating precision he had used to take them. Then, unhurried, he turned to confront the frozen assembly. Heels. His voice was not loud. It had no need to be. "Miss Vance," he announced, "is with me." The ensuing silence held for 2 interminable seconds. Heels. And then the edifice of polite society fractured. "What? Gregory, who is that man? Is that Drov?" A violent, uncontrollable tremor began in Arya's knees, a phenomenon she felt but did nothing to quell. Her eyes sought her father. Heels. Gregory Vance was a statue at the crest of the grand staircase, his hand strangling the polished wood of the banister. His face was a mask of chalky white, not the flush of anger, Heels, but the bloodless pallor of a man forced to watch a priceless artifact be consumed by flames. Beside him, Vivin was a flurry of frantic, unheard words. Gregory registered none of it. His focus was locked on Lucian, Heels, who absorbed the stare without flinching. A silent, brutal war was being fought in that space. A dialect of power Arya could not comprehend but could feel in her bones, like the atmospheric drop before a Category 5 hurricane. Heels. Celeste, mere feet away, had a hand clamped across her mouth. "Walk with me," Lucian murmured. "Where are we going?" "Elsewhere." His hand settled at the small of her back. Not a push, but an anchor, an immovable presence. Heels. "They will converge on us in 30 seconds. I would prefer to avoid conducting this conversation before a captive audience." "What conversation?" "My terms." She allowed him to lead her. As they moved from the dance floor, the crowd parted for them, Heels, creating a wake as if for the passage of royalty or a contagion. A roar of voices erupted behind them, shouts, whispers, and the sharp, sibilant hiss of women weighing the scales between sympathy and schadenfreude. Arya heard none of it as distinct sounds. Heels. The world had become a muffled, distant echo. Her skin felt like it was on fire. Heels. The imprint of his mouth on hers was not a memory of passion but the seal on a contract. When a passing server lost his grip on a tray of champagne, Lucian's hand moved with an unnerving economy, stabilizing the vessel without a single glance. Heels. They arrived at the ballroom's periphery, at a side exit marked only by a velvet rope. He unhooked it, gesturing her into a grim, narrow passage, where the orchestral score vanished as if hitting a wall of glass. The door clicked shut. Heels. And the silence that followed was a physical presence. Arya faced him, her trembling hand a stark confession in the gloom, making no effort to conceal it. "What?" she exhaled. "Have you done?" "Precisely what I promised." "No. What have you truly done?" Heels. "Do you grasp the scale of it?" A single bitter laugh escaped her as she pressed a hand to her forehead. Heels. "Can you comprehend what becomes of my existence tomorrow?" "I can." "Then articulate it." "Tomorrow," he stated, his voice a flat line. "Every powerful figure in this city who perceived you as a decorative object will be forced to recognize you as a fortress." Heels. "And they will dedicate the next week to discovering who constructed its walls. And who would that be? We will construct them jointly. I don't know who you are. That is a fact. I don't trust you. That is also a fact. Then why?" Heels. The word fractured as it left her, a sound of profound vulnerability she despised. "Why would I consider this? Why did I follow you from that room? Why did I allow any of that to occur?" "Because," he answered softly, 30 seconds before I made contact, Heels, I watched you looking at the exits. I knew then. You had already resolved, long before my arrival, that you would not be returning to your father's house tonight." Heels. Arya could only stare, the machinery of her mind grinding to a halt. "I was going to leave," she whispered, the admission tasting like ash. "I stood there and thought, I am walking out of here and going straight to the train station. I'm aware." Heels. "You couldn't possibly know that, and yet I do." "How?" He offered no verbal response. None was required. His preternatural stillness was its own disquieting thesis, and she lacked the will to challenge its implications. Further down the corridor, Heels, a door opened to reveal a man in a dark suit, something else. He was built like a brutalist monument. He gave Lucian a brief, sharp nod. "The car is prepared, sirs." "My thanks, Mr. Volov." The man Volov did not retreat. Heels. He simply stood at a respectful remove, a silent and formidable guardian. Heels. Arya analyzed him. He is in your employ, she observed. He is. You had a vehicle on standby. I had a vehicle on standby for myself, or for the two of us. Lucian's gaze remained locked on hers. The outcome depended entirely on your decision. Heels. From beyond the ballroom door, she could hear the symphony of chaos begin to swell. Her father's voice, a blade of fury. Vivian's, a high-pitched note of panic. Others joining the chorus. They were closing in. Lucian registered the sound. Heels. Yet his focus on her never wavered. Arya, he said, I will not compel you. It is crucial you understand that. If you wish to return, I will open that door this instant. I will claim it was my error. I will assume all fault. You may go home, Heels, and we can erase this night. I will not trouble you further, Heels. And the other matter, the arrangement my father finalizing? He didn't flinch. I am powerless to prevent that from occurring if you do not bear my name. The words occupied the air between them, dense as granite. My name, Heels. A laugh should have been her answer, or a slap, or a reminder of what century they were in. She did nothing. Her mind presented a gallery of damning images. Marcus's proprietary hand on a marble pillar. Vivian selecting this very navy dress for her, Heels. Her father, Gregory Vance, avoiding her gaze all evening, and the slow, chilling certainty that had solidified in her soul that he had been prepared to sell her. She lifted a hand to her cheek, Heels. Her skin was dry. The absence of tears was a strange, hollow discovery. I require an answer first, she said. Ask it. He studied her for a long moment, his stare a form of dissection. I came to this place tonight with 3 objectives. Heels, he said at last. 2 concerned your father, 1 concerned you. Which one prevailed? That, he replied, is a significantly longer narrative. We are telling it this evening. This evening. He watched her for another count, Heels, and then the barest hint of a smile touched his lips. As you wish, he said, this evening. At that moment, the door to the ballroom was thrown open with a violent crash. Gregory Vance stood framed in the opening, his face no longer ashen but a mottled, Heels, apoplectic red. Vivian hovered at his back, her mouth agape, flanked by 2 security men from her father's detail. You, Gregory seethed, Heels. He aimed a trembling finger at Lucian. You have no concept of the destruction you have just wrought. On the contrary, I know its precise measure, Lucian answered, his posture utterly relaxed, his hand a steadying warmth on Arya's back. Heels. I have just rendered your daughter an unsellable asset. The term sell impacted Gregory like a physical strike. Arya, Vivian shrieked, her voice thin and piercing. Come to us this instant. We are leaving. Arya remained motionless. Arya, Heels. Her father said, his tone shifting, dropping to a sudden quiet, a dangerous softness. Step away from him. She looked at her father, this man whose affection was a public performance, whose touch she only knew when a lens was present. Heels. She looked at the clutch in her hand, at the navy dress intended to be the uniform for her own sacrifice, at the tremor in her fingers she no longer felt the need to suppress. Did you promise me to him? She asked, her voice low. His jaw muscle worked. Arya, Heels. This is neither the time nor the place. Did you? We will discuss this when we are home. Did you, Dad? He offered nothing. The silence was the confession. Something tectonic shifted deep within her chest, a sensation she had never before known. Heels. It was not grief. She was intimately acquainted with grief. This was colder, more ancient. It was a part of her that had waited an entire lifetime for this specific betrayal to finally call it from its slumber. She turned her head toward Lucian. Which car, Heels, she asked, is yours the black one? Take me to it. Heels. Gregory made a move to lunge forward. One of his guards mirrored the action, but Lucian's man Volov merely shifted to his weight. It wasn't a threat, not an overt block, but a quiet claim on the space that made his physical mass an immutable law. Heels. Lucian never broke eye contact with her. Are you certain, Arya? No. And you wish to proceed regardless? Yes. He gave a single nod. He extended his hand for the second time that night, and for the second time, Arya Vance placed her own within his. Heels. They began their walk down the hall. Behind them, Gregory Vance started to shout her name, his voice fracturing and breaking under the strain. Vivian was pleading with him to desist, and in the doorway, Celeste stood immobile, Heels, her hand still pressed to her mouth, her eyes wide with the beautiful, terrible shock of it all. Heels. Arya did not look back. Mr. Volov opened the far door for them, a silent warder. The cool night air was a cleansing shock, thick with the scent of recent rain and the clean metallic smell of a resting city. A long, low black vehicle idled by the curb, Heels, its engine a quiet thrum. As they neared, a driver in a dark coat stepped out to open the rear passenger door. Arya paused, her hand flat against the car's cold roof. She looked up. The Hartley building loomed above them, heels, a monolith of golden light and obsidian glass, and in one of those windows 3 stories up she imagined a silhouette watching her departure. A ghost at the feast. "Miss Vance," Lucian said quietly from behind her. "Heels." "Do not call me that," was her only reply, a rejection of the title without offering a replacement. An exhale of capitulation. She entered the car, followed. The solid sound of the door closing was punctuated by the clinical click of the locks. Heels. As the car pulled from the curb, the lights of the Hartley Grand Ballroom receded in the window, a dying star that had once been the center of her known world. It was in this moving chamber, beside a man whose hands she now saw were mapped with scars, heels, that the absolute gravity of her choice settled into Arya Vance's bones. A tremor began in her fingers, a physical manifestation of her gamble. She did not try to still them. For a long while, Lucian simply watched the city bleed past the window. Then, heels, his eyes aimed forward, he began to lay out the architecture for the night. He spoke of a private residence, perhaps 20 minutes away, his heels. He described a guest wing, its locks under her sole authority, and mentioned a woman, Katya, who would be present. Heels. Katya's role, he was careful to articulate, was to see to her needs. Then he delivered the crucial detail, the deliberate transfer of control. "She reports to you, not to me." He constructed a scene of absolute sanctuary. She could retreat to that wing, heels, bolt the door, and no living soul would disturb her until she decided otherwise. This is the first strategic concession. Arkia's voice finally cut the silence. "Why are you telling me this?" His response was an exercise in bending logic. "Because," he said, heels, his tone low, "you have just entered a car with a man you do not know, and I want you to remember that you possessed a choice even after all your choices were taken away." The paradox was a physical thing, a knot in her mind she couldn't unravel. Heels. "I don't understand you. You will." A promise that carried the weight of a threat. Heels. In that moment, all that was real was the blur of streetlights, the ceaseless vibration of her phone, displaying names she was actively exiling, and the cold certainty that Gregory Vance was already initiating calls that would reignite old conflicts. Heels. And in that car, beside a man whose breathing held a disquieting regularity, she felt the fracture. The person she was had become unrecognizable to the girl who woke up that morning a lifetime ago. Her hands rested in her lap, heels, and she allowed them to tremble. For the first time in 4 years, Arya Vance was no longer invisible. The vehicle sliced through the city like a blade through still water. Silent, measured, heels, cleanly dividing intersections where traffic lights bled a crimson stain onto the wet asphalt. Arya watched the interplay of light and dark on Lucian's reflection in the glass. Light, shadow, on, off. It was a fleeting tableau, heels, making it impossible to discern if he was observing the world passing by, or her reflection observing his. Heels. A vibration against her thigh, the 9th in as many minutes. She flipped her phone screen down. "You can get that," Lucian offered. "I don't want to." His suggestion was purely strategic. Answering is the cleaner path. Ignore them. Heels. And they will materialize on your doorstep before dawn. Arya's response was the sound of a life being cut away. "I no longer have a doorstep." The calm in her own voice felt alien, borrowed. "My home was his home. I've just walked out of it." Heels. He didn't counter. He simply gave a slow, deliberate nod. The data was received, filed away. The phone buzzed once more. She glanced at the screen. 23 missed calls. Gregory, Vivian, Celeste, an unknown number, and that same number again. Twice. Heels. She slid her thumb to engage the silent mode, then placed it face down once more. Heels. "Who is the unknown?" Lucian inquired. "That's the definition of unknown. Indulge me." She did. The screen illuminated a 628 area code, a sequence holding no meaning for her. "Not from around here," Lucian observed. Heels, his eyes fixed on the road. "It will be one of the men your father is indebted to." "He's indebted to men." It was a statement, not a question. A single muscle flexed along Lucian's jawline. "We'll address that," he said. "Address it now." "Arya?" He started. Heels. "You agreed we would speak tonight. At the house. After you've had a moment, some water, and are not still living inside the first 10 minutes after a man has kissed you in public for the first time." The final words landed in the car with a peculiar gravity. Heels. "How could you know it was the first time?" He finally turned his head, his eyes finding hers in the dim cabin. His expression was a neutral plane. Not cold. Heels. Not warm. Merely present. "Because you haven't once touched your mouth," he stated. A simple observation of behavior. A woman who has been kissed that way checks at some point for smudged lipstick. You haven't. Heels. You forgot you even possessed a mouth until I brought it up. Her hand began an unconscious ascent toward her lips. She forced it back down. He did not smile. The lack of a smile was a profound and unexpected relief, feels. A smile would have signaled a conquest, a predator's satisfaction that would have required a counterattack, a rage she had yet to forge. She had to understand before she could allow herself to hate. They continued in silence. This was not a house, feels. That was the first conscious thought to form as iron gates retracted, and the car rolled onto a driveway of pale gravel, illuminated only by its own headlights, feels. The drive was a long, slow curve vanishing behind an imposing wall of black hedges. A guardhouse was posted at the property's entrance. A figure within rose to his feet as they passed but made no other gesture. Then they were through the hedges, feels, and a lawn unfolded, and beyond it the structure. 2 levels of dark stone and vast sheets of glass that poured a soft, warm light into the surrounding darkness. It looked meticulously maintained, curated yet unnervingly still. How many people are here, feels? She asked. Sometimes 9, sometimes 3. With you here tonight, we will be 7. That isn't a house, Mr. Droff. That's the size of a staff. Lucian is fine. I'm not sure I'll be using it. As you wish. The car glided to a stop, feels. At the head of a short flight of stone stairs, a woman stood waiting, her hands clasped, hair pulled into a tight, severe knot, feels. Her age was impossible to place. 50, perhaps older. Her face a landscape carved by experience, leaving no terrain for surprise. She wore a simple dark dress, a uniform defined by its deliberate lack of any official insignia. She carried the authority, feels. Arya registered, of someone who has served in a place like this long enough to possess it in a way its legal owner never could. Katya, Lucian supplied, answering the unasked question. She manages the estate. She has been with me for 11 years, feels. She is not paid to deceive you, nor will she. The driver opened Arya's door. She emerged slowly, the sharp crunch of gravel beneath her heels, the shocking clarity of the cold night air. It was pure, stripped of the city's fumes, feels, smelling only of damp soil and stone, feels. She smoothed the front of her navy dress, a garment that now felt like an artifact from another, buried life. Miss Vance, Katya said, descending the steps to meet her. Her voice was low, unhurried, with an accent that hailed from nowhere recognizable, feels. Welcome. We've prepared your rooms. She detailed the preparations like a ship's manifest. There is food available if you feel hungry, and a bath has been drawn if you do not. I have left both doors to the guest wing unlocked from the inside, feels, so that you may secure them yourself, in any sequence you see fit, once you are settled. You had this prepared? Yes. Before I got here? Yes. He informed you I was coming? Feels. Katya's gaze shifted to Lucian for less than a heartbeat. He informed me, she corrected, that there was a possibility. Arya looked back at Lucian. He remained by the car, hands at his sides, observing them from a distance. He was outside this exchange, feels. As their eyes met, he offered a small, almost imperceptible nod toward the house, feels. The instruction was clear. Go inside. I will approach when you are prepared for me. She followed Katya up the stairs. The interior was a shock of warmth and life, a direct contradiction to the sterile aesthetic she had anticipated. It was beautiful, feels. Certainly, dark wood floors, rich, worn rugs, a long corridor defined by a huge black and white photograph of a desolate mountain summit, but it was also marked by the scars of human presence. A pair of men's boots by the door, caked in dried mud, feels. A book on a side table, splayed open on its face, its spine broken. A half-full coffee mug cooling next to a lamp. The conclusion was inescapable. This place was truly inhabited, feels. Your wing is this way, Katya stated, her voice a calm line drawn through the silence. Past the library, up the rear staircase, you will have the entire east side. She was mapping the architecture of a gilded cage using the vocabulary of liberation, feels. You do not need to emerge for any reason. There is a kitchenette, a bath. A telephone inside the door connects only to my line at any time. A pause heavy with implication. It does not connect to his. Why not to his? Katya halted, feels. Her gaze fixing Arya's like a specimen pinned to a board. Because, she replied, the word a near whisper. He does not wish for you to feel that he is waiting behind every door you choose to open in his home. Arya's throat tightened. Thank you, feels, she managed to say. A single nod from Katya, no smile. They passed through a cavern of books, where old bindings and new dust jackets watched from shelves that reached the ceiling. Feels. A single leather armchair stood guard before a cold stone fireplace. They ascended a tight spiral of servants' stairs, moving through a doorway that made Arya's breath catch. It was a suite of rooms, a beautifully appointed prison, feels. The first was a sitting room where a low sofa and two deep armchairs waited like solemn witnesses. An archway led to a bedroom, holding a bed vast enough for ghosts and draped in curtains the color of a storm-tossed ocean. Beyond, feels, a glimpse of a bathroom in marble and brass where steam already rose from a deep tub carrying a faint herbal scent. On a table was a tray. A covered bowl radiated a gentle warmth into the air, bread, feels. A pitcher of water holding pale green wheels of cucumber, and a chicken broth, its aroma a phantom of comfort. If there is something else you'd rather. Katya started. This is fine, Arya interrupted. Feels. This is more than fine. Katya placed a small, simple folder on the table. Inside, she explained. It is new. Its number is not associated with your name. Only 4 individuals have it. Myself, the driver, Feels. Mr. Volkov, whomever him, you are free to call whomever you like. Her tone was flat, the recitation of a script, the second to this. Sweet. It is the only key, apart from my master, which I will not use without your express permission, barring a fire, Feels. And if he wants access, he will not use force. What if I invite him in? A flicker of muscle around Katya's mouth, not quite a smile, but the ghost of one, Feels. Then that, Miss Vance, becomes your affair, and the key will be in your possession. Katya's departure was as methodical as her welcome. She stopped at the threshold. One final thing, she said. I am to inform you on his behalf, Feels, that he will be in the library downstairs for the next hour. After that, he will retire to his study. She seemed to pause, searching for the precise phrasing. He has said that he will wait for as long as is necessary, Feels, and that if you do not come down tonight, no offense will be taken. In that moment, Arya's legs gave way, as if her strings had been cut, and she collapsed onto the couch. A body surrendering to a reality the mind refused to process. Okay, she whispered, Feels. Lock the door, Miss Vance. Katya did, a single sharp click, the sound of an entire world contracting to the dimensions of 3 rooms. For a very long time, she remained perfectly still. The suite was silent. Feels. Only the slow ticking of a heating element in the wall marked the passage of time. A tree branch scraped the window, a ghostly sound from a world that had ceased to be relevant. Her focus was on the tray. The bowl, the phone, the key, Feels. The new trinity of her existence. Then, as was inevitable, some internal dam broke. She retreated to the bathroom, to the smaller, more confining space, and allowed the grief to surface. It was not a cinematic sorrow, not the kind designed for an audience, Feels. It was a purge, a raw, violent tearing from a place buried deep within. She smothered the sounds with her own hand, an old, practiced instinct to hide the evidence of her own suffering, Feels. Her grief here is a hydra, a creature with many heads. There is a mourning for her mother, for the council now forever out of reach. There is a lament for the person she once was, a girl for whom social ruin felt like the absolute nadir of existence, Feels. But the sharpest head of this beast is the confirmation of a betrayal she had already sensed. A truth she'd read in her father's posture long before it was given a name. The catharsis ends not with peace, but with the quiet of complete exhaustion, Feels. She remains still for a long time before beginning a ritual, the washing of her face. The confrontation with the stranger in her own reflection. She methodically scrubs the lipstick from her mouth, not an act of cleansing, but of stripping, Feels. It is a deliberate peeling away of a persona, a search for whatever true face remains to present to the man awaiting her, Feels. The reflection she sees is not younger, merely more authentic. She moves back to the main room, to the instruments of her new life he has provided. The phone is a cold weight, both a connection and a shackle. Its screen is a blank, sterile slate. Within it, Feels, she finds the cast of her new reality. Katya, the overseer, a driver, the logistics, a name that resonates like a threat, and L, just L, a single initial that lays a false claim to an intimacy he has in no way earned. She studies this list, Feels, the very architecture of her cage laid bare. She consumes half the broth and all of the water, a calculated gesture of survival, before moving toward the staircase. She is already internalizing the cadence of the house, Feels, the way its plush carpets consume all noise, the way the lighting is perpetually dim, a constant twilight meant to pacify a captive animal, Feels. She pauses at the base of the stairs, faced with the illusion of a choice. Her turn toward the library is the decision, and there he is, Lucian. But he is not staged as she anticipated. He is not positioned behind a desk, Feels, framed and magnified by symbols of power. He sits in an armchair at ease, a glass nearby. His jacket is off, his sleeves are rolled. A dark tattoo snakes around one forearm. His refusal to look up as she enters is a calculated maneuver, feels. A way of ceding the threshold to her, of forcing her to make the first move. She accepts. I've reconsidered the water, she says, her voice more stable than her resolve. I need something stronger, wine, whiskey, what you're having, feels. This is an attempt to occupy his territory, to claim a small piece of the ground on which she now stands, feels. He closes his book, leaving the page unmarked, and rises to pour a drink from a crystal decanter. It is a simple, almost domestic gesture that serves to profoundly disarm. As he offers her the glass, the motion is precise, feels, extended just so their fingers will not meet. It is a form of calculated deference to her autonomy that is in itself a different kind of violation. Sit, he offers, another choice that carries no actual choice within it. Or stand, as you wish, feels. She selects the couch opposite his chair, creating the maximum distance the room's geography will permit. The fireplace sits between them, a dark void laid with wood but unlit, a promise of heat that remains cold. She tastes the drink. It has a clean fire, feels. Talk, she orders. For a brief instant, a flicker of exhaustion crosses his face, the first fissure in his facade of absolute command. Feels. Very well, he concedes. He begins with a clinical recitation of facts, a litany of her life meant to establish his omniscience. Father, Gregory Vance. Corporation, Vance Holdings. Stepmother, Vivian Ashford. Half-sister, Celeste. Feels. He is constructing a foundation from truths she knows, positioning himself as the narrator of her story, and then the killing blow. And you are the daughter of Gregory and Eleanor Cassidy, a set designer, deceased 4 years ago. Feels. His hand clenches around the glass, the crystal groaning under the pressure. Eleanor, she breathes. No one in that house ever speaks her name. His response is the key that turns the lock on her entire world. I know. Feels. How? Because I employed people to find out. There is no apology in his voice. It is a simple declaration of his capability and his reach. I will not pretend I didn't. That was one of the first things I wanted to say. Here, honesty is used as a weapon, feels. An admission of ruthlessness deployed to foster a strange kind of trust. She inclines her head. This at least is a language she recognizes. He proceeds to unveil the foundational lie of her existence, feels. Her father's empire is nothing but a hollowed-out facade, a truth hidden from the world, a deception that retroactively poisons every memory. He speaks of a liability owed to a private lender, a figure whose name is so potent it cannot be spoken, feels, making the danger feel vast and undefined. In 5 months, this entity would arrive to collect. Not currency, a consideration. He lets the euphemism hang in the air between them. Feels. His gaze is steady, unblinking. Say it, she demands. She shuts her eyes, a futile gesture against a reality that has already taken root inside her. Lucian's tone is flat, the detached voice of an analyst examining a specimen. Feels. Not a formal marriage in the traditional sense, not legally binding. A prolonged engagement. It was meant to buy your father more time. The clinical, brutal reality of the situation. You were the collateral, feels. He even details the planned announcement party, grounding this monstrous betrayal in the mundane logistics of caterers and invitation lists. She opens her eyes. What is his name? Lucian pauses, then declines. That name is a point of leverage, feels, he states, the kind I still require. A stark confession of his own strategic calculations. Feels. Not over you, he clarifies, over him. Say his name anyway. He observes her for a long moment, then he surrenders the information. Anton Reyes. The name is a key that unlocks a repressed memory. Instantly, feels. A polite man from a charity gala is transformed. A man who inquired about the book she was reading, whose hand lingered on her wrist for a fraction of a second too long. It wasn't social awkwardness. It was an assessment. A quiet inspection of merchandise, feels. The tremor returns to her hand, the aftershock of a revelation delivered weeks prior. The final piece of the puzzle falls into place. So you knew, she says, her voice empty. Feels. Her focus shifts from the father who bartered her away to the man who watched it happen. Feels. I knew what was being arranged, Lucian's voice narrates, a confession from a scene yet to play out. I have been aware for approximately 11 weeks. The unspoken accusation thickens the air. And you did nothing to warn me. No. Feels. His justification is a cold analysis of her complete lack of agency. He posits that a warning would have been futile. She would either have dismissed it as paranoia or confronted her father, an act that would have merely accelerated the outcome. Feels. A letter could not have saved you, Arya. I could only save you in a public forum, where every witness became an accomplice. He presents his grand, theatrical intervention as the only viable path to salvation. Feels. He even concedes that the timing was convenient for his own purposes, another dose of calibrated honesty, designed to feel like truth while disarming her rage. Heals. The laugh that breaks from her is a brittle, fractured thing, devoid of humor and full of remembered pain. It's the sour sound of recognition. At least you're honest about it. His response is precise, like a surgeon outlining a complex operation. Feels. I am making a conscious effort not to deceive you in any of this. He offers a preemptive admission of his own future fallibility, a strategic play to frame any subsequent deceit as a character flaw rather than a calculated betrayal. Feels. She cuts through the gambit, directly challenging his motives. Why not simply act the part of the hero? His answer reveals the foundational pillar of his entire psychological makeup. Because that is not a mask I possess, he admits, Heals, a raw acknowledgement of his own damaged nature. And you would see the falsehood, you would walk away, and I would lose you, Heals. With this, his possessiveness is reframed as a primal fear of abandonment, a devastating play for an empathy that will become the first strand in a web of traumatic attachment. Then he reverts to the cold dissection of his purpose, Heals. The first motive is pure strategy, a tactical move on a board drenched in blood. Gregory Vance is indebted to a rival faction. By binding Arya to Anton Reyes, that power would have been consolidated through an alliance. Heals. Lucian's intervention is engineered to shatter that consolidation. You, standing at my side tonight, eradicates that debt. His language reducing her to her core function. A strategic piece. That is the first reason. Heals. The second reason is intensely personal and far more cruel. There is an aspect of your mother's life, he begins, that your father has spent a fortune to keep suppressed. He positions himself as the sole gatekeeper of this secret history. Heals. The only one who can deliver a truth he knows will wound him deeply. In doing so, he forges himself into the only conduit to her own past, ensuring she can never be truly free of his influence. Heals. You need this information before the event so you can make a choice about your participation. Her throat constricts, the words themselves a form of physical pressure. It's about my mother, she says, a statement, not a question. Yes. The specifics? Heals. Not tonight, Lucien. Not yet. His tone is a firmly closed door, but one without cruelty. The evening has been significant. I refuse to stack one trauma on top of another in the same hour. I give you my word, the information will be yours, Heals, and it will be soon. Tonight it is imperative that you rest. Her eyes sting. She has no tears left. That source ran dry hours before. And the third reason, she asks, her voice barely a whisper. You said one was about me, Heals. A profound silence expands between them, heavy with the oppressive weight of the unlit room. I saw you. 6 months ago, he says at last, in a coffee shop on 5th, the one on the corner by the old theater. Heals. I was present, though you were unaware. My table was merely 3 from yours. He constructs the memory with a stark, dispassionate precision. You were absorbed in a book. At the counter, a man berated the barista, his voice sharp over a mistaken order. Heals. The girl, 19 perhaps, was on the verge of collapsing. His narration is a steady, analytical current. You rose. Without a single raised decibel, you walked to the counter, positioning yourself as a literal shield between them, and you presented him, Heals, quite calmly, with an ultimatum. He could offer the girl an apology, or he could depart. What he could not do was continue. His focus remains locked on hers. He departed. You remained with your back to me for perhaps 30 seconds, Heals, and I observed the tremor in the hand you rested on the counter, a detail you concealed from her. Arya was a figure of frozen stillness. I recall the moment, she whispered. Heals. After you returned to your seat, I settled your bill. I instructed the barista to remain silent. She could only gaze at him, the memory now fractured and reassembled into something else, something tainted. That is not a reason, she countered. Heals. That is an anecdote. It is the reason I came to the Hartley in person tonight, rather than dispatching an agent. I did not engineer your actions in that cafe, Arya. I observed them, and I drew a single conclusion. Heals. Here exists an element within the Vance household forged from an entirely different material. The admission was cold, a piece of strategic analysis. That night I returned home and commissioned a complete file on you, Heals. It was then I learned of Anton Reyes, of the debt your father carried. That is the precise chronology. It is vital that you comprehend this as well, Heals. That particular trap was not of my design. I discovered you already entangled in it, a snare set by another man, and I elected to step into it alongside you. The room was sealed in absolute silence. For a moment, Heals, Arya drove the heel of her hand into her eye before letting it drop. I don't know how to interpret that, she said. I am not requesting that you do. Then what is the purpose of saying it? Heels. Because I gave you my word that I would attempt to speak without deception. A breath escaped her. This is my attempt. Understood, she replied. Understood, he repeated. The hearth was a void of cold stone, yet she stared into it. Heels. You said I possessed a choice, she murmured after a beat. That was the term you employed. In the hall. Heels. You said I could stand alone and be consumed, or I could stand with you, and the phrase you used for that was, shape the game. My words, correct. That is not a choice. That is a marketing slogan. Heels. Something flickered across his expression. Not quite amusement, something drier. A reasonable critique, he allowed. So you require the true choice. In unvarnished terms, he placed his glass down. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. Heels. The ink on his right arm grew defined in the dim light, a dense, deliberate script she had not yet learned to read. The true choice, he stated, is this. In the morning I will issue a declaration. It will state that you are now under my protection. Heels. It need not mention an engagement unless that is your wish. It need not say anything personal whatsoever, unless you desire it. Its sole function will be to serve notice to all interested parties that any action against you is an action against me. Heels. That gesture secures you a month. 2, perhaps. Within that window, your father cannot finalize his arrangement with Reyes, because Reyes will not provoke a war with me over one woman. He is rather attached to his kneecaps. A vivid turn of phrase. Heels. My phrasing can be less vivid if you prefer. No. Continue. During that month, you have alternatives. If your desire is to vanish, I will facilitate it. A true erasure, new documentation, a new existence, capital in an account linked to that identity. Heels. Employment should you want it, a residence. You will not hear from me again unless you initiate contact. That is option 1. And the second? The second is that you remain. You learn. You uncover what your father truly did to your mother. Heels. You discover the true nature of Reyes. Heels. You discover my true nature. And at the conclusion of that education, should you determine an alliance with me holds some benefit, we will construct it, based on terms we author together. If you decide against it, Heels, the option to disappear remains available to you, along with all the knowledge you have acquired. My door will be closed, and I will not pursue you. She was quiet for a long-waited interval. Those are not choices of equal weight, she finally noted. Heels. No. You are biased toward the second option. You want me to accept it. Yes. Why? Because, he said, the word stripped of all calculation, I possess a profound aversion to being alone. It was not the answer she anticipated. Heels. It contained no grand strategy, no complex design. It simply existed in the space between them, a small, unadorned truth against which she had no defense. Heels. She raised her glass, taking another sip. The burn in her throat had subsided to a low warmth, less like a fire and more like the steady pressure of a hand on her skin. What is the protocol for tomorrow? She inquired. You will wake at your leisure. Heels. Katja will bring you breakfast at your request. At approximately 10 o'clock, I will require 20 minutes of your time as a statement is issued. You will not be on camera. There will be no photographs. Heels. Your only task is to review the text and inform me of anything incorrect or unsettling, and it will be amended. After that, the day is yours. The house is yours. The garden. There is a pool, should you wish. The library naturally is yours. Heels. I will be here intermittently. I have appointments that cannot be rescheduled. Heels. I prefer not to reschedule them, as it is imperative the individuals I am meeting see that tonight's developments have not disquieted me. Have they? Has what? Disquieted you. He looked at her, and for a fraction of a second, Heels, something ancient and brutally restrained shifted behind his eyes. Yes, he confirmed. Why? Because my strategic modeling had accounted for only 2 outcomes tonight. I had not modeled for you to walk into my library and ask me to continue, Heels, when you could have simply taken the broth and bolted your door. She had no response to that. She did not know how one would be formed. The fireplace was still a dark mouth. She set her glass on the table, Heels, the sound a faint click in the room's oppressive silence. I am not agreeing to you, she declared. I am aware. I am agreeing to the month. I am aware of that as well. I require a meeting with my father. He became perfectly, alarmingly still. When? Heels. Soon. Heels. Not tomorrow. Soon. I have questions for him, and I will not receive the answers from a third party. No intermediary will be present. You will not orchestrate this meeting for me. I will sit opposite him at a table in a location of my choosing. Heels. You may be in the building, but you will not be in that room. And I will ask him myself. Those, Lucien, are my conditions for the month. I will have that. He observed her, a long, heavy silence expanding between them. Agreed, he said at last. Feels. His voice low. Very well, you will have it. I will assist you in selecting the location. She gave a single sharp nod, not trusting herself to speak. As she stood, a slight tremor returned to her legs. A phantom echo she willed into stillness. Feels. I am retiring, she managed. Good night, Arya. Feels. She stopped in the doorway, her palm flat against the cool wood. She did not turn back. Yes. The woman, Katya, she indicated you told her I might arrive. Not a certainty, a possibility. That is accurate. Feels. And what probability did you attach to that possibility? He let the silence hang for a beat. Approximately 1 in 4, he replied, that low. I possess no behavioral history for you. There was no logical foundation to assume you would come. Feels. Then why was an entire wing of the house prepared? Because, he stated, his voice unchanging, a 1 in 4 probability is still a contingency for which one must prepare. She remained a silhouette in the doorway for another moment. Then she vanished. Feels. Upstairs, the bath was never drawn. She left the broth untouched. The television in the sitting room remained inert, a black mirror reflecting nothing at all. Feels. She took off the navy dress and folded it, placing it on a chair where it lay like the surrendered flag of a country she no longer inhabited. She donned a robe Katya had left, cream-colored and soft, its shoulders wider than her own. She got into the bed, Feels, a vast and solitary territory for a single person, and for a very long time sleep did not come. Lying on her side, she observed the window, where a tree branch was now a motionless etching against the night. Feels. She listened to the architecture settle around her, the unfamiliar skeleton of an unfamiliar man's house, where, for the first time in memory, she had been given a door with a lock she alone had the key to turn. Tears returned, a brief, noiseless, Feels, almost unnoticeable release, and then she slept. Feels. She awoke into a world of diffuse, hazy light and the aroma of coffee. Katya had passed through like a phantom, leaving a tray in the sitting room. It held fresh fruit, a small pot, 2 pieces of toast, and a newspaper folded with precision. Feels. Atop the paper lay a single yellow note, the black ink a stark contrast, front page. Do not rush. Arya picked up the newspaper and saw herself. Not the lead story, not the main photograph. It was a grainy shot taken from a distance, Feels, capturing 2 figures in a kiss at the center of the Hartley ballroom. Her own face was a storm of motion and shadow. One could discern Lucien's hand at her jaw, the back of his head, and the stark circle of observers penning them in like a jury. Feels. The headline was an incision. Drauvlays claimed Avance Hyrus in stunning public maneuver. Feels. She reads the headline 3 separate times. No one had ever applied that word to her before. She forces her gaze through the column. It is a bare skeleton of facts adorned with the flesh of wild speculation. Feels. A quote from an anonymous attendee describes it as the most merciless romantic maneuver the city had seen in a decade. A source supposedly close to Gregory Vance provided a terse no comment. There was nothing attributed to Lucien. Feels. Nothing from her own voice. A final brief paragraph mentioned a formal announcement was anticipated sometime in the morning. She sets the paper aside. She manages half a slice of toast, the bread like ash in her mouth. Feels. Then she moves to the bathroom and, for the first time, confronts her own reflection in the unforgiving light of that mirror. She looks utterly ruined. Feels. Her eyes were a roadmap of her ordeal, bloodshot and swollen. Her hair, a chaotic testament to distress rather than simple neglect. This was not the portrait of a newly minted heiress. Feels. It was the clinical presentation of a 23-year-old woman grappling with the gravity of an irreversible choice. In that cold, quiet moment, she was performing a desperate act of self-justification. She washed her face, a hollow ritual. Feels. She put on the clothes laid out for her, their perfect fit a detail her mind registered not as care, but as another layer of suspicion. She found him, Lucien, in the library, seated, phone in hand. As she stepped into the room, his head came up. Feels. And for a fraction of a second, a micro-expression, not relief, but the raw components of it surfaced on his face before being ruthlessly submerged. His greeting was a flat line. Morning. Feels. Did you sleep? He asked. Good. The papers are calling me an heiress. They are. I'm not. Legally you are. Your father established a trust under your mother's name. We verified it last night. The value is inflated by the press. Feels. And he's been making withdrawals that are likely legal but morally corrosive. But yes, the title is technically yours. I didn't know. I'm aware. She crossed to the desk but chose to stand, a small, defiant act to claim some ground. Heels. Show me the statement, she commanded. He complied, sliding a single page across the polished wood. 3 brutally concise paragraphs declared that, as of the previous night, Arya Vance was under the personal protection of Lucian Drav. Heels. It further stipulated that any unsolicited contact or approach would be interpreted as a direct act of aggression against him personally. The statement concluded that the nature of their relationship would be clarified, if at all, Heels, at a time and place of their choosing. There was no mention of marriage, no pretense of affection, no reference to her father. It's cold, she observed, her voice devoid of emotion. It is. Is that the intention? Yes, Heels. I don't want Reyes to perceive an emotional vulnerability. Weakness is an invitation. She reread the text, her gaze tracing the weaponized sentences. 1 line, she said. I want to add 1 line. Add it. She took the pen from his desk. Heels. At the very bottom, in small, sharp lettering, she wrote, Miss Vance requests that her father, Gregory Vance, and his household refrain from making public statements on her behalf until she has spoken with him directly. Heels. She pushed the document back. Lucian read her addition once, then a second time. He looked up, and for the first time since their encounter, something that could be undeniably identified as a genuine smile touched his mouth. Heels. This will inflict a significant narcissistic wound, he remarked. Good. He gave a slow, deliberate nod of approval, then picked up his phone. He made a call and dictated the entire statement. Her addendum included, Heels, to someone on the other end with instructions to release it in exactly 7 minutes. He hung up. 7 minutes? What happens then? The social invisibility you've cultivated is over. From now on, you will be hyper-visible. She took a long, Heels, steadying breath. Okay, she said, pulling out the chair opposite him and sitting down. She folded her hands on the table. Then let's begin. Heels. He held her gaze across the desk for a long, unblinking moment. Yes, Lucian said. Let's. As if on cue, the desk phone erupted with a shrill ring. He ignored it. She mirrored his stillness. A phone would scream a desperate, insistent shriek, Heels, for 4 consecutive days. Not that particular one. Lucian let it exhaust itself the first afternoon before having it taken away. But in the quiet that followed, Arya found she would still flinch, her body conditioned to the phantom assault. Heels. The noise simply found new conduits. Kucha's phone 2 rooms away with its polite, relentless chime. Volkov's a harsher, more guttural ring. The black phone in the library which Lucian answered at random intervals. Heels. Establishing a terrifyingly unpredictable rhythm. The entire world, it seemed, was shouting the name Arya Vance. It was the absolute inverse of her expectations. She had gambled on being ignored, just under a new, more dangerous classification. Heels. Instead, by Tuesday, her face was featured in 3 separate magazines. Someone had unearthed a stark, old student ID photo. One news program, Katya informed her with clinical detachment, had deployed the word Cinderella twice and concubine once. Heels. Concubine, Arya repeated, the word a foul taste in her mouth. Katya, her hands moving in the methodical rhythm of folding fresh linens, replied, They lack imagination. I am not his concubine. No. Then what am I? Katya paused in her work. Heels. You are, she said, her voice a calm, steadying force. Arya Vance, that is who you are. Everything else is just a label someone is attempting to force upon you. You do not have to wear any of them. Heels. Arya considered that thought for the remainder of the day. Lucian had been truthful about the meetings. Heels. On the second morning, she walked downstairs into a household already on a war footing. An SUV idled by the gate. 2 men she did not recognize stood like sentinels in the hall. Volkov was murmuring commands in Russian into a headset, and Lucian, Heels, dressed in a severe dark suit, was scanning a file while a woman in a pantsuit gestured toward a chart. He spotted her on the stairs. I won't be back until late, he announced, his voice slicing through the low hum of activity. Is that acceptable? Heels. Is that a question requiring a genuine answer, or is it a formality? It was the shadow of one, the muscular precursor to the expression itself. I need a genuine answer, he said. Then yes, it's fine. Go. Heels. Katya has my number if you need it. Heels. If you need anything, you tell her, he stated. Then he was gone. This established the pattern of that first week. His presence in the house was a fractured thing. A shared silence over coffee in the mornings. An hour in the library before bed. Heels. They would sit in separate chairs, the space between them saturated with unspoken thoughts. The quiet, which had begun as a source of tension, had gradually transformed into something neutral, A shared stillness unlike anything she had ever known. Feels. There was no physical contact. He never initiated it. Once, as she reached for the salt, her wrist brushed the back of his hand. He pulled his own away with a reflexive, almost imperceptible quickness. Feels. Immediately restoring the empty space that defined their dynamic. Feels. It was a reflex born of conditioning, an unconscious tic she observed and analyzed for 2 days. The old phone was a crypt of notifications. She resurrected it on the 3rd day, compelled by a piece of unsolicited wisdom from Katya. Feels. You can excavate them or you can bury them, but ignoring them is its own kind of worship. Arya perched on the bed's edge, the screen's glow illuminating her face as she scrolled. Gregory, 41 unheard messages. The first read, Arya, please call me. Feels. This has spiraled. The last, Arya, I don't know what he's told you. Some of it will be true. Most of it will be a lie. You don't know who he is. I am begging you to come home before you do something you can never take back. Feels. He had written begging. Gregory Vance. She read it 3 times, trying to recall a single instance when he had ever used a verb that knelt. He ended with, I love you, honey. She focused on honey for a long time. Feels. It was a word exhumed from a forgotten era, a calculated syllable engineered to provoke an emotional collapse. She did not reply. Vivian's texts were a different form of violence, a frontal assault. You have disgraced this family. Feels. You have disgraced your father. You cannot imagine the consequences. Celeste is a wreck. Your father hasn't eaten in 2 days. You selfish, selfish child, come home. Feels. Then, on day 2, a sentence that sent a shock of ice through her hand. If you do not come home this week, you will find that door is closed in a way your mother would have understood. Arya read it again. The phone felt cold, heavy. She put it down. Feels. She picked it up again. She took a screenshot of the text. With the image burning on the screen, she walked down the hall and into the library. Lucian was at his desk, a thin man in glasses. A lawyer, she assumed, sat opposite him. Both men looked up. Feels. I need a minute, she said. Lucian's gaze shifted to the lawyer. Feels. The lawyer departed with a perfunctory nod, a silent exit that left a vacuum in its wake. Into this space, Arya placed the phone on Lucian's desk, its screen a glowing indictment. He absorbed the text, Feels, and a single muscle flexing in his jaw was the only betrayal of the storm within. Its arrival, he inquired, his tone a low frequency. Yesterday. The implication is clear to you. No. But its authenticity is. She only moves with overwhelming force. Feels. When the board's already tilted in her favor. His gaze met hers, a silent exchange of strategic understanding. The meeting still proceeds? He asked. Yes. Immediately? Yes. With my father. My father, but not on his terrain, nor on yours. Feels. A neutral space. You will secure the location. I will secure the room. He gave a single sharp nod. You have 24 hours. Feels. Agreed. She pivoted, halting at the doorway without turning back. Lucius. The intelligence concerning my mother. The information you promised was imminent. A heavy quiet settled between them. Feels. Will its presence be a variable in this negotiation? She pressed. It has that potential. Is it of a nature that would make me despise him? That judgment is not mine to make. Is it of a nature that should make me despise him? A long, Feels. Deliberate breath was his only preamble. Yes, he conceded. She acknowledged this with a sharp nod to the empty space before her and was gone. The meeting was scheduled for Friday, within a structure she had never entered. An old stone bastion of law, Feels. One of those hushed fortresses in the financial district, permeated with the scent of leather, mint, and the kind of wealth that has no need for volume. Feels. The conference room resided on the 7th floor, an exercise in calculated sterility. A long table stood like an altar, flanked by walls, the color of bleached bone, and a single forgettable seascape. Feels. A pitcher of water and 4 glasses were the only concessions to human need. Every trace of comfort, food, flora, any suggestion of softness, had been clinically excised. The subject, Arya, had selected the room for this exact atmospheric chill. Feels. She arrived ahead of schedule, a minor but meaningful seizure of control. Her associate, Lucian, escorted her to the threshold, where they rehearsed the final parameters of their war game. Does the subject anticipate needing immediate extraction? Feels. Negative. Lucienne would hold a position 2 rooms away. A protocol was established. 2 knocks on the shared wall would summon Volkov to retrieve Lucienne. It was a language understood. Feels. 3 knocks signified a total asset evacuation from the premises. 3 knocks and they would cease to exist there. The subject confirmed her understanding. There was no physical contact. Feels. A detail of professional discipline she registered with quiet appreciation. I will be fine, she stated. The words meant more for herself than for him. I am aware. The phrase was a stark reflection, a litany. I am going to be fine, Lucien. Heals. His response remained unchanged. I said, I am aware. He withdrew. The subject then moved not to a seat along the table's flank, but to its head, a clear tactical maneuver designed for psychological dominance. Heals. This position afforded her an unobstructed view of the door to her left, the window to her right, and the vacant chair at the far end, awaiting its occupant, her father. She poured a glass of water, drank half, and folding her hands, Heals became utterly still. Heals. Gregory Vance manifested 11 minutes later. He came alone, a variable the subject had not factored into her projections. Her primary observation was one of scale. He seemed diminished. She immediately interrogated this perception. Heals. Cross-referencing it against the potential bias of a daughter's memory. It is a known phenomenon. A figure from childhood often shrinks when encountered on an equal plane of adulthood. This accounted for a portion of the discrepancy, Heals, but not its entirety. Her father, the collar of his shirt hung loose. His hair, remembered as steel gray, was now merely gray and had thinned at the crown. A small, dark abrasion beneath his jaw, poorly concealed, Heals spoke of a hand that had faltered with a razor. Heals. Arya. Take a seat, Dad. He paused at the threshold before proceeding to the chair at the table's opposite pole. Thank you, he offered, for agreeing to this. The subject dismissed the sentiment with a gesture. Do not thank me. Heals. This is not for your benefit. He accepted this with a nod, pressing his palms flat against the table. It was a signature gesture of his, a power play from a man who commanded spaces by physically pinning them down. But here, it seemed defensive, Heals, as though he were gripping the table for stability. I'm not sure how to begin, he confessed. The subject immediately took command. Begin with Anton Reyes. His head snapped up, his expression a mask of pure shock. Who informed you? Heals. Begin with Anton Reyes. He closed his eyes, a brief retreat from the moment, before some internal mechanism shifted. He had resolved to deploy the truth. Heals. The subject observed the capitulation in his posture, a signal she recognized intimately. I had been planning to make an introduction, he began. The subject bisected the fabrication. You already did, 3 months ago. In our living room. Heals. He placed his hand on my wrist before he departed. A full-body tremor passed through Gregory, a small, genuine spasm of shame. I instructed him not to, he said, his voice lowering. The subject demanded precision. Instructed him not to what? Heals. Specifically, not to be so transparent, not to startle me before the transaction was finalized. That's not fair, Arya. Fairness is irrelevant. Is it accurate? His silence was the confirmation. The subject poured him a glass of water. Heals. A strategy inherited from her mother. An offering of comfort to a man in confession will maintain the flow of information, even when the air is toxic with hate. Heals. She slid the glass down the length of the table. He did not touch it. Why? She asked. You are aware of the reason. State it, Dad. Articulate it aloud, in this room to me. The company, he said, the words weighted like stones, is compromised. Heals. To what extent? The extent from which there is no recovery. Not without external intervention. The sum of money. He named a figure of an unimaginable scale. The subject's face remained a placid mask. Heals. The product of a lifetime mastering the art of emotional suppression. The training was serving its purpose, and Reyes was the intervention. Reyes' organization. Yes. And my role? He hesitated for a beat. Arya. Heals. What was my function in this arrangement, Dad? He buried his face in his hands. Upon looking up, his eyes were wet. The subject logged the physiological data for later analysis. You were a component. Heals. A component, she echoed. The social component. A union of the two families would. The subject completed the sentence he could not. I was the bride. Yes. Heals. You were prepared to sell me to a man I had encountered for 20 minutes to settle your accounts with his family. I was going to present it to you. When? During our engagement celebration? I was going to inform you, he corrected. Heals. That an opportunity had arisen, that Anton was taken with you, and that your consent would be of great assistance to our family. And if you refused, you would have pursued another path. Yes. Dad. Yes. Heals. You have become a terrible liar. You were once so proficient. What? He simply held her gaze. You did, he said. The subject allowed the silence to hold. Heals. She displayed no unease in the quiet, a tactic she had learned at his knee. The evening at the Hartley, he went on, when he kissed you before that entire assembly, when you departed on his arm, I returned home. I sat in my study. Heals. and I came to the realization that I could not recall the last time I had truly looked at you. The confession was a self-excavation digging its own grave. I don't mean just looked. I mean seen. I do not know the color of your eyes, Arya. I had to ask Vivian Eels. I had to ask my own wife the color of my daughter's eyes, and she did not know either. And I sat there, and I experienced a shame I have not felt in 20 years. The subject let him exhaust the narrative, Eels, allowing the entire sordid story to bleed out onto the table, she said. What? My eyes, they are gray, like Mom's. Eels. He shut his eyes once more, a brief act of surrender. I know, he said, the sound heavy with fatigue. I do know. I did know. I was waiting to see if you would tell me. She refused the gambit. Do not play these games with me, Dad. Not on this day. Eels. I lack the capacity for it. He dragged a hand across his face. I am trying with all my might to speak to you as an adult and not like a thing that I have broken. She held his confession in the silent air between them, Eels, assessing its weight. Then tell me about Mom, she said, fundamentally altering the tactical landscape. He froze. What about her? Do not do that. Do not force me to extract this from you piece by piece. Tell me what you did to her. A tremor, Eels, nearly imperceptible, ran through his hand where it lay on the table. Who told you? He demanded. Not who? What, Dad? The silence that followed was a chasm. Eels. This was no performance. This was a visible unearthing, a man digging through the collapsed tunnels of his own history to find a truth he had interred while it was still breathing. Your mother, he began at last, the words thick with the dust of years, Eels, was never supposed to have you. Her reaction was a physical shockwave, a tremor that passed through her unseen. What is the meaning of that? It means, he said, his voice becoming hollow, I was married to Vivian for 5 years. Celeste was 7, Eels. I had constructed a life. Eleanor. Your mother was a beautiful error, and then she informed me, I'm pregnant, and what did you do, Dad? I told her she was not permitted to have you. Her fingers tightened around the glass of water. Eels. It remained still, and she refused. She did. What then? Then I sent men, he conceived the first tremor of a fracture in his voice, to offer her money to vanish, to go elsewhere. My name. It was a fortune, Arya. A true fortune, a home, Eels, and a lifetime stipend. She said no. So I had them raise the offer, and she refused again. And then he faltered. Then you what? I had an attorney draft a contract. What kind of contract? That if she kept you, she waived all rights. To me, to my name, Eels. My money, everything. And she signed it. She signed it, Arya repeated, her breathing a precise metronomic count. Inhale for 4, exhale for 4. So when she was dying, she began, her voice a perfectly calibrated instrument, Eels, and we had no money for her medicine, Eels. And I pleaded with you for help, and you said you had done enough. I gave her more than the agreement stipulated. You gave her what you deemed she was worth. Arya, you allowed my mother to die from a curable illness, Eels, because a document you forced upon her at 24 declared you free. It was more complex than that. What was it then, Dad? Was it difficult? State the price. What price? The cost to have kept her alive for 2 more years. You know it, Eels. You're the sort of man who would have the exact number. Say it. He named the sum. Measured against the debt he'd just confessed to, it was less than nothing. It was air, Eels. An amount he could misplace without registering the loss. She placed her glass on the table. Her hand, she observed with a kind of clinical removal, was perfectly steady. The detail was noted, then filed away. Thank you, she said. Arya, for your honesty, Dad. Eels. I mean it. I hadn't expected it from you. I loved your mother. Okay, I did love her. I heard you. Arya, please. Dad, yes, there is one more thing. He met her eyes then, his face a hollowed-out mask. Eels. The expression of a man arriving at the final stop of a long internal decay. What? Vivienne sent me a message 2 days ago. She warned that if I didn't return, the door would be closed to me in a way my mother would have understood. Eels. What was she implying by that? His entire edifice crumbled. This was the moment, the point of revelation. A chapter of this history existed that Gregory had not written, a secret he did not exclusively possess. For the last 20 minutes, Eels, she had observed him navigate the shadowed corridors of his own construction. But this, the mention of his wife's targeted threat, was a door he never anticipated being forced to unlock. She began, Arya, do not lie to me. Not now, Eels. You wanted to address me as an adult. This is what that looks like. He placed his hands back on the table. They trembled. Vivian, he said, spoke to your mother just before she died. I don't know her precise words. Your mother came to me afterward, Eels, and shattered. She asked me if it was true, Eels. I told her, no, it wasn't. Her question was ambiguous. I assumed she meant the money, that Vivian had revealed the existence of the contract. I denied it. Your mother then adopted the exact expression you wear now, and she said, Greg, feels, swear to me you didn't know about the other baby. Arya's breath caught in her throat. The other baby, she echoed, the words feeling like poison on her tongue. Gregory recounts saying, I had no idea what she was talking about. He continues, feels, I swear to you, Arya, on my life, I didn't comprehend the implication. When I pressed her for more, she retreated. She left. 3 weeks later, she was dead. I confronted Vivian, who claimed your mother was simply delusional from the medication, feels, and I made the choice to believe her, feels. I permitted myself to believe it. And for 4 years, I have fled from that question because, at my foundation, I am a coward. Arya studied him. There was another child, she stated, not as a question, but as a fact unearthed. I don't know, he whispered, feels. Before me? After? Whose was it? I don't know, Arya. I have told you everything I am aware of. She held his gaze for a long, silent beat. He wasn't lying, a reality that was somehow more chilling. She rose from her chair. Gregory sprang to his feet, heels, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. Arya, sit down, he ordered. Dad, sit down, he complied. I require one thing from you, she said. Go home. Inform Vivian that I know about the contract, and tell her that I know she spoke to my mother. Feels. Do not ask what she said. You will allow her to contemplate that for 1 week, that is all. And then what? Then I will ask her myself. Arya, she will not talk. Not if she refused to even tell me. She will. How can you be certain? Because, Arya said, feels, her voice lowering, I am not the same girl to whom she sent that message. The next time she sees me, she will recognize the distinction. Gregory could only stare. You aren't coming home, he concluded. No, you're staying with him. I'm staying with myself, feels. Dad, he simply owns the architecture around me. Arya, that man, stop. You have no concept of what he is. I know what you are, he flinched. That isn't fair. You use that word quite often. She walked to the door, pausing with her hand on the knob, feels, but did not turn back. Feels. My mother's medical records, she said. Do you still possess them? Yes. Send them to this address to the law firm on the ground floor before the end of the day. All of them. Every scan, every physician's note, every hospital invoice you settled, feels, and every one you ignored. I intend to review them myself. Why? Because I want to know the objective cost of saving her, Dad. Not the narrative you've constructed for yourself, but the real one, the one the doctors documented. I want the number. Feels. He remained silent. By the day's end, she reiterated. Then she opened the door and walked out. She did not slam it. That would have given him a narrative about her hysteria. She would not grant him that story. Feels. She closed it with a soft final click. She moved down the corridor on legs that felt surprisingly stable beneath her. As she turned the corner, Lucien was there. He was leaning against the wall, hands in his pockets, heels, examining the same unremarkable landscape painting she had been sitting beneath. He pushed off the wall as she neared. He posed no questions. Is there a room in this building? She asked, each syllable articulated with immense precision, heels, where I can destroy something of no consequence. Yes, show me. He led her down a set of stairs to a small, disused office filled with boxes, a single floor lamp, and a layer of dust coating everything. A forgotten space. Heels. He closed the door behind them, his gaze surveying the room before he retrieved a heavy ceramic mug from a bookshelf, an artifact left by a tenant long since departed. This, he offered, extending it to her. She hurled it at the far wall. Heels. The impact was like a gunshot, a brutal detonation of porcelain, shards sprayed like shrapnel. In the confines of the small room, the sound was overwhelming. She stood in the center of the floor, hands now empty, her chest rising and falling heavily. Heels. And to her own astonishment, no tears came, only rage. It was a clean fire, an energy with both shape and a target, and for the first time it was not directed inward. She allowed it to fill her, a warm, bright, and exquisitely controlled burn. Feels. Lucien observed her. Another? He asked. No. Very well. She sank to the floor, back against the dusty wall, still wearing the expensive navy trousers she'd selected with such intention that morning. After a moment, Lucien sat beside her. Feels. Not too close, but near enough. He told me, she said, about your mother. Yes, and the contract, and that Vivian visited her before she died, and that there may have been another baby, and that he has no idea whose it was. Feels. And I believe he was telling me the truth. Lucien remained silent for a considerable time. That is the element I was not aware of, he said at last. Which element? The other baby. Feels. You didn't know? No. Lucienne, do not engage in games with me about this. I am not deceiving you, Arya. I was aware your mother was attempting to communicate something vital to your father in her final weeks. I never knew its nature. I had my theories. Feels. An infant was not among them. She found that she believed him. Every nerve ending urged her to resist, but she did not. So what is the next move, she asked. Now, he replied, his voice low. You determine the scale of the war. Meaning? Feels. Meaning Vivian is not a minor adversary. Meaning if another child exists, it was concealed for a reason, and those reasons will have teeth. Meaning if we approach her with the same strategy you just used on him, she will not fracture. Feels. Your father is governed by his love for you. She is not. I'm aware she has no love for me, Lucienne. I know. Feels. Then tell me what you are truly saying. He turned his head, his gaze fixing upon hers. I am saying that as of this evening, the girl who was rescued at a party is gone. I am saying that the next time you enter a room with any of them, Feels. You are not the person he shields, but a woman constructing her own empire. I am saying that for the remainder of this conflict, you will never again enter a negotiation where I am your sole weapon. We begin forging your own. How? Feels. You will attend the meetings, not all of them, only those I select. You will listen. You will observe everyone. You will learn to distinguish between a genuine negotiation and a piece of performative theater. Feels. We will retain your own counsel. We will secure control of your mother's trust. We will discover precisely what your father has been siphoning from it, and we will leak that information to the correct people at the opportune moment. Feels. And we will identify who Vivienne sent to your mother's hospital room in the week she died, because an agent was there, and that individual is how the other baby enters the board. You believe it was Vivienne? Feels. I believe Vivienne Ashford has lived for 9 years projecting the illusion that her family sold that pharmaceutical company for honorable reasons. I believe she has spent 4 years pretending she never threatened a woman on her deathbed. Feels. And I suspect she sent you a note this week saying the door is closed, a phrase she knew your mother would recognize. Feels. And I believe she has no idea she isn't talking to the girl she thinks she is. A laugh escaped Arya. A harsh, ugly, short and sharp, but it felt like breaking a fever. Okay, she said. Okay, Lucienne, let's build me. He nodded slowly. First lesson. Feels, he said. Yes. Your father is going to call you tonight. He'll be crying. He will say things he means and things he absolutely does not. You will not answer. Why? Feels. Because the single greatest error in a war with people like this is allowing them to apologize before they've made a concession. An apology before the surrender is just a discount. Feels. You don't take discounts, you take what's yours. Okay. Second lesson. Yes. Tomorrow we are going to be photographed, intentionally. A controlled environment, a small event we can exit at will. You will not smile. You will not pose. Feels. You will simply stand beside me and stare into the camera lens like a woman who has already determined the outcome. Why? Because the picture from the Hartley party makes you look like you've been kissed. I want the next one to make you look like a killer. Feels. She watched him for a moment. Yes. Are you going to let me fall in love with you? The question was a stray shot, as unplanned as the laugh had been. The silence that followed was long and substantial. I'm not going to stop you. Feels, he said finally. If that's a choice you wish to make. Feels. But I have no intention of asking for it. You've had too many demands made of you, things you were never afforded the opportunity to weigh. You will not have that experience with me. That fails to answer the question. You persist in saying that. Feels. Because you persist in avoiding an answer of your own. My question is being answered. Perhaps you need to pose a different one. Very well. Are you destined to fall in love with me? A laugh broke from him. The first authentic one she had ever witnessed. Feels. It was brief and convulsive, sounding, she thought, like a mechanism left to seize with rust, now abruptly forced into motion. Probably, he conceded. Probably, Lucienne. I see. That is a substantially more direct answer than I anticipated. Feels. I'm aware. She let her head rest against the wall. Feels. For the space of a single heartbeat, she allowed her eyes to close. The atmosphere was dense with the aroma of paper, aged chemicals, and the faint memory of soap from a ceramic mug long since emptied. Defying all logic. Feels. It was the first moment in 4 days the turbulent rhythm in her own chest had ceased. All right, she stated. The photograph is scheduled for tomorrow. The lawyer follows the day after, and Vivian is to be dealt with by week's end. Feels. The end of the week is precipitous. End of the week, Lucienne. He observed her for a long-waited count. Fine. he conceded at last. End of the week. Her eyes opened, her focus settling on the shattered fragments of the mug. Feels. Who is responsible for cleaning that? She inquired. I will be. You? It is my building. Of course it is. Feels. She rose to her feet, performing the small, reflexive gesture of brushing non-existent dust from her trousers. A hand was extended to Lucien, and he accepted it. She then leveraged her own weight to pull him to his feet. Feels. A motion that demanded a surprising degree of force. A flicker of insight crossed her features. This man required no assistance to stand. His acceptance of her hand was a deliberate choice. He was allowing the dynamics of power to shift. Feels. A calculated gesture designed to give her the sensation of control on this particular day. She made no comment on it. Words were unnecessary. They exited the small, stark office together, moving as a single unit as they descended in the elevator. Feels. Outside, the black car was positioned precisely as expected. Volkov stood holding the door as the urban sky dissolved into the silver of late afternoon. Arya Vance entered the car under her own power. Feels. She did not pause for him to open her door. 7 stories above, the man who was her father remained at that table. She did not look toward the window. Home, Lucien instructed Volkov. The vehicle merged with the flow of traffic. Lucien, she said. Feels. Her gaze fixed forward. Yes. A final matter. Yes, Ira the other infant to be located within the week. I am indifferent to who or what that individual has become. I need the information. He paused, considering his words. Arya, he began. Feels. If this person exists and is alive, they are not searching for us. That is an individual who almost certainly has a life. You are proposing to shatter it. I am proposing to know. I am advising you to be certain. Feels. She turned her head, her stare fixing him in place. My mother, she articulated with a flat, quiet precision, died posing a question to my father about this person. I will not die with it unresolved. Find them. He met her gaze for a long moment. Okay, Feels, he yielded. His attention shifted to the window. The city blurred past them, a long gray smear of structures that had not yet learned her name. And somewhere in that expanse, in a nursery or a classroom or an office or a grave, Feels, was an individual whose existence was about to be fractured and remade, just as hers had been. And Arya Vance, in the rear of a black car on a silver afternoon, Feels, permitted herself to feel for the first time not merely the injury that had been inflicted upon her, but her own nascent capacity to inflict it in return. Feels. The photograph was released to the public on Wednesday morning. Arya's sleep had been poor. She had remained in the library with Lucien until nearly 2 in the morning, dissecting the dense legalese of her mother's trust. 41 pages. Feels. Each one felt like a stone tablet, heavy with subclauses nested within clauses that upon a second reading revealed themselves to be the only articles of any consequence. For 9 years her father had been siphoning money. Not in a single act, Feels, but in small, consistent amounts each quarter, the sort of withdrawals designed to pass unnoticed on any single statement, but which, over a decade, Feels, accumulated to nearly 1/3 of the fortune Eleanor Cassidy believed she was leaving to her daughter. He employs the term custodian in the documentation, Lucien observed, indicating a line. Feels. Custodian is not his legal designation. Custodian is what one calls oneself when feigning authority. He was not. He was a trustee bound by a fiduciary duty. For years, he has treated this as his private financial account. For what purpose? Feels. Your life. That is what he will argue in court. He will produce a list of the private schools. He will list the clothing. He will list the tutor. The one he retained for a single summer when I was 15. My stepmother hired the tutor. Feels. Your stepmother, Lucien corrected, will not corroborate his version of that. Arya stared at the document. Can I recover this from him? She asked. Yes, covertly. Not covertly. Cleanly, yes. Covertly, no. He will contest it. Feels. Because the moment you initiate action, his financial advisors will see his accounts are being monitored by someone who is no longer an ally. Good. Feels. Lucien observed her for a protracted moment. Arya, he said. Yes, you have progressed from I don't want this to be ugly to good in approximately 72 hours. I spoke to my father, Lucien. I know. I am entitled to this. Feels. You are entitled. A laugh escaped her, weary, fragile, authentic. They continued their work for another hour, after which she ascended to her suite and succumbed to a fitful sleep. When she awoke on Wednesday morning, Feels, the scene was already being constructed on the front drive. It was a simple tableau, no grand affair, no red carpet, merely one photographer, Feels, a man named Hollis, who had a history with Lucien and understood not to pose questions for which he did not require answers. standing on the gravel with a camera that appeared inexpensive, but was, in fact, Thiel's, one of the most powerful compact models in the city. Thiel's. It was Lucien who had selected the attire. He had inquired, a careful formality in his tone, and she had consented. She had felt a need to see his perception of her, and the reflection that was returned was one she did not recognize. Thiel's. The dress was a column of deep green with long sleeves and a high neckline, the fabric unadorned by any embellishment, no jewelry. Her hair was left to its natural state. No color was applied to her face save for her lips. Cachet painted them a stark, Thiel's, profound red that, for an instant in the mirror, felt like the mouth of a stranger, until Arya claimed it as her own. She stood on the steps at his side. "You will not smile," he murmured as Hollis manipulated the lens. "You have said that before." "I know," Thiel's. "Should I be looking at you or at him?" "At him, at the lens. Do not look through it, look at it. As if you are assessing its value," she complied. Hollis captured 4 frames. Thiel's. He displayed the second to Lucien, who examined it in the cold morning light. Thiel's. He angled the small screen toward her. In the image, she did not appear as if she had been kissed. She did not appear afraid. She appeared as a woman standing on the edge of possessing a house she was not yet certain she wished to retain. "That one," Thiel's. Lucien said, "That one." Arya gave a slight nod. At 0900 hours, it was disseminated to the world with a single stark caption. Arya Vance photographed at home Wednesday morning. Nothing further. No context, no official statement. By noon, Thiel's, it was the lead image for 4 newspapers. By 1500 hours, the 18th message of the week from Vivian Ashford illuminated her phone. "I need to see you." Arya read the words in the garden. Seated on a low stone bench, Thiel's, a cup of tea cooling in her hands. She read them a second time. Thiel's. She placed the phone on the stone beside her. She lifted the cup and drank the tea, cold though it was, and did not reply, not yet. In this newfound quiet, she was beginning to grasp the profound weight of a non-response. Thiel's. It was a form of power she had never been permitted to wield. Her entire existence had been a sequence of replies to instructors, to Gregory, to Vivienne, to Celeste, to men at functions whose hands found her wrist when she was 12. Thiel's. To fail to reply was to be impolite, a transgression she had been conditioned since birth to avoid. Now she was discerning the difference, the boundary between rudeness and power. She was learning that silence, when deployed with intention, Thiel's, is not an absence where an answer ought to be. It is an answer in itself, one that extracts a far higher cost from the questioner than words ever could. She was learning other lessons in those days too. Thiel's. Lucien had not been speaking metaphorically about the meetings. Thiel's. On Thursday, he escorted her into a conference room downtown, 7th floor. Not the building where her father had met his demise, but near enough to exist within its shadow. 8 figures were seated around a long table, men in their 50s, Thiel's, a lone woman in her 40s, a younger man at the far end recording minutes. The topic of discussion was a port. He possessed no knowledge of ports. She had asked him that morning, and he had replied, "You are not present to speak, Thiel's. You are present to observe. I will make the introductions, you will then sit at my right, and for 2 hours you will do nothing but study the expression of every individual in that room. When it concludes, we will compare our observations." Thiel's. What am I studying them for? Who is dissembling? Who is genuinely angered? Who is feigning anger for strategic advantage? Who entered the room already aware of the outcome and is simply waiting for the rest of us to arrive at it? Thiel's. Lucien, I have never. You have been doing it your entire life. Thiel's. Since you were a child. You did it at the Hartley. You did it in your mother's hospital room. You do it every time Vivian is in your line of sight. All I'm asking is that you do it now in a place where it has consequences. And so she did. Thiel's. Seated at his right hand, she became an appendage of his authority. He offered a single introduction, a piece of stage direction. "Miss Vance is observing today. Please continue." After that, no one met her gaze. Thiel's. Yet she felt the weight of their scrutiny. The older man in the navy suit and another, thinner, with a poorly executed shave, their eyes darting toward her 3 times within the initial 20 minutes. Thiel's. The woman in her 40s offered a more potent form of observation by never looking at all. Arya, in turn, catalogued their hands, their glasses of water. Thiel's. The subtle contortion of their mouths, forming yes, when their minds were broadcasting something else entirely. Thiel's. She registered the thin man's abrupt phone call, a manufactured crisis designed for retreat. She watched him return to the room only to declare his necessary departure. She watched him exit. And 20 minutes after his chair sat empty, heels, the figures on the table tilted decisively into Lucien's column. Later in the car, he broke the silence. "Report," she replied. "The call from the thin man was a fabrication. He required an exit before the final numbers were on the table." Heels. He lacked the fortitude to say no to the group. Why? Because he is indebted to the older man in the navy suit. It's not financial. The obligation is tied to a wife, or perhaps a daughter. I couldn't be certain. Heels. He was incapable of voting against him face to face. For a long beat, the engine was the only sound. Heels. "That is a flawless summary of the events," he stated. "Is it?" "Yes. How did you know?" "Because Navy Suit informed me 2 months prior that he possessed leverage over the thin man, and he intended to use it in this negotiation." Heels. "I wasn't certain it would be today. I only knew it was a possibility." Arya shifted in her seat, turning fully to face him. "You placed me in that room already knowing the solution." "I placed you in that room," Lucien corrected, his focus on the road. Heels. "To determine if you could arrive at a solution I already possessed, which you did, in roughly 40 minutes. For a transaction you knew nothing about, surrounded by individuals dedicated to concealing everything. Was that a test?" "Yes." "Did I pass?" Heels. He offered a sidelong glance, the ghost of a smile returning. It appeared more frequently now, these brief phantom twitches, like muscles recalling a long-dead language. "You passed," he confirmed. "Good." Heels. "Are you?" "Yes." The subject's response indicates that these exercises are approaching their culmination. The rationale provided is an organized transition of power. "You will begin to command the room," Heels, "and I will cease to be the one who holds the answer before you walk in." To this, the subject, Arya, offered no comment. The silence was permitted to remain. It accompanied them on the drive back to the house. Heels. It's significant that this specific quietness over the past week had shed its awkwardness and evolved into a new baseline of communication. The objective for Friday, the antagonist, Vivin. For 3 days, Heels, the subject had analyzed the choice of battlefield, altering the location twice. The father's home was weighed and rejected. A restaurant was rejected. The antagonist excels at public theater. Lucien's residence was rejected. Heels. The tactical high ground was too pronounced, reducing the confrontation to a hollow exercise. Heels. The subject required the encounter to be controlled, contained, surgical. A tea shop was selected, a corner establishment she had driven by 100 times but never frequented, owing to a past remark by the antagonist, Heels, that such venues are for women with nowhere else to be. This choice guaranteed that Vivin, by her own creed, would be an outsider there. It ensured Vivin would step onto territory she could not claim. The subject got there early. Heels. She claimed the table in the far corner, her back protected by a solid wall, her view commanding the only entrance. This was the same tactical decision witnessed in the law office. She is, it appears, Heels, internalizing the geography of power from her mentor, Lucien. The caregiver, Katya, had proposed being nearby, not at the table itself, but within range. A silent reinforcement. Heels. The subject mulled it over for some time before declining with a shake of her head. "She must see that I am alone," Arya stated. "She will be cruel," Katya forewarned. "I know. She will probe for the part of you that still craves her validation." "I know." Heels. "Is that part still present, Miss Vance?" A long inhale, held, then released. The subject conceded the point. "Yes," she admitted. "A little, less than there was a month ago." "Then she will locate it. Let her." Katya studied her for a long, dense moment. Heels, and then she gave a nod. "I will be at the house when you are finished. There will be soup." The discussion was concluded. The antagonist, Vivin, entered the tea shop 2 minutes past the agreed-upon time. Heels. Her presentation was, as ever, impeccable. A coat the color of camel, a cream scarf, pearls at her ears just small enough to denote wealth rather than advertise it. Heels. Her hair was styled in the soft waves the subject had watched her form with curlers for 1,000 nights of a vanished childhood. She moved with her characteristic economy, Heels, like a woman who had allocated precisely 26 minutes of her day to this meeting. She paused 2 steps inside the doorway, her gaze methodically scanning the room. She located the subject. And in that initial moment, Arya witnessed it. Heels. A flicker. A micro-expression so fleeting one could deny it happened. It was not the recognition of a stepmother finding a stepdaughter. It was the alert signal of an operator identifying an unforeseen variable. Heels. Vivin navigated the space and sat without any preliminary greeting. "You look drained," Vivin observed. "So I have noticed." A waitress materialized as if on cue. Vivin requested Earl Grey. "Milk, no sugar." Heels. with an inflection that implied the act of writing it down was superfluous. The subject had already ordered the most neutral tea available. She was not there for the flavor. "Why here?" Vivian inquired. "Because you despise tea shops," Feels. "I do not despise tea shops. You once remarked they were for women with nowhere else to be. I have no memory of that. You said it at the country club. I was 16. You had on a green dress." The muscles around Vivian's mouth tightened. Feels. The memory had been retrieved. Feels. Arya tracked the memory as it broke the surface. "Fine," Vivian conceded, her hands clasping on the tabletop. "You selected the location. You selected the time. You have clearly rehearsed a speech, so deliver it. I need to know what you said to my mother." Feels. Vivian's entire posture became rigid. It was a tell, lasting less than a second, but it was definitive. "Your mother," Vivian said, "was deeply unstable toward the end. I'm not asking about the end. I am asking about the conversation, the one just before." Feels. "You visited her at the hospital, by yourself. My father was unaware. You entered her room, you said something, and she spent the next 3 weeks of her life dying while asking him what it meant. What did you say?" Feels. "I truly do not believe this is an appropriate topic for us." Feels. "But it is the one we are having, Arya." "Vivian, you do not understand what you are even asking." "Then explain it to me." The older woman held her stare, a genuine appraisal, and for the first time, Feels. Arya detected something in Vivian's eyes beyond performance or disdain. It was calculation, pure, rapid adult calculation. Vivian was executing a psychological risk assessment on her right there at the table. In that moment, Feels. Arya knew she was being reclassified. She understood that the woman across from her was slowly realizing that the stepdaughter she had categorized as manageable for 11 years had just become an unfiled threat. "Your mother," Vivian began, Feels, articulating her words with care, "was not the only other woman your father had. I know that. Do you?" "Yes," Feels. "He married you while he was already involved with her." "I have known that since I was 14. That is not what I am referring to." Arya's mouth felt like dust. "What are you referring to, Vivian?" Her adversary maintained the gaze for a long count. Feels. "I am referring," she said, "to the fact that there was another woman before your mother. During my marriage, while Celeste was a girl, I managed her in the manner women of my world manage these situations, discreetly, with funds, without drama." "Okay," Feels. "And that woman became pregnant." "Okay. That child," Vivian said, "was never born." Arya remained perfectly still. "Are you informing me?" "I am informing you," Vivian interrupted, "that I paid to guarantee it was never born." The woman agreed. Feels. "A medical intervention occurred at a clinic, in a state where neither she nor your father had ever resided." Feels. "She received a significant amount of money. She executed legal documents, and the matter was concluded." "Your mother," Vivian affirmed, "was made privy to this information." "Yes, by you, by me." "When?" Feels. "Approximately 1 month before she died." "Why?" Vivian inclined her head. It was a small practiced gesture Arya recognized. The tell that always came before a final devastating statement, a truth held back for peak effect. "Because your mother," Feels, Vivian explained, "had started insisting to Gregory that you be formally recognized as a Vance in his will. She had been applying pressure for 6 months, and his fortitude was weakening. He was a man governed by sentiment, Arya, Feels, and your mother was terminally ill. Sentimental men lose their resolve when women are dying." Feels. "I visited her because she had to understand precisely what measures I would take to safeguard my own daughter's inheritance." I recounted the story of the other woman. I told her about the procedure. I communicated that I was prepared to do it again. Feels. Albeit with different tactics if she persisted. "Any questions?" Arya's hand was coiled around her teacup. She had no recollection of placing it there. "You threatened her," she whispered. "I presented her with a warning." Feels. "You told a woman on her deathbed that you had paid to end a pregnancy, and that she should cease fighting for her own child's legacy, or you would. I told her I would not forfeit everything I had constructed." "That is what you believe you told her." Feels. "That is not what she heard." Feels. "I cannot be held accountable for her interpretation." But the threat was heard. Vivian's lips seemed to search for a response that would not come. "You entered my mother's hospital room," Arya stated, her voice descending into an unnerving calm. Feels. A change she registered with a kind of clinical distance. This quiet was not a product of weakness. It was a biological response. The body conserving all its resources once it has determined that volume is a pointless expenditure of energy. Feels. "And you told her a story about a child you paid to have erased, and you did it so she would understand precisely what you were capable of doing to her child." To me. I made no threats, Vivian. I did not threaten. Look at me, Eels. Vivian's gaze met hers. I am her daughter, Arya said. I was her daughter right there at her bedside. When she stopped eating, when she couldn't remember her own sister's name, when she woke me one night to ask, is the baby all right? Eels, and I assumed she was speaking of me. Eels. So I told her, yes, Mom, I am right here. And she replied, no, not you, the other one. I was convinced she was delirious, a mind lost on its deathbed. I attributed it to the morphine. For 4 years you allowed me to believe it was the morphine. Eels. I never allowed you. You sent her to her grave, Arya interrupted, believing I was destined to be next. Vivian offered no reply. The tea arrived. As the waitress placed the cup before Vivian, she received no acknowledgement. The server, Eels, sensing the psychological frost in the air, quickly departed. Vivian lifted the cup, her hand absolutely steady. It was a hand that was never not steady. That physiological control was the very quality Arya had spent a lifetime despising in the woman, Eels, even as she desperately sought to replicate it. Eels. You are not a child anymore, Vivian observed. No. And so I will offer you the truth as one adult to another. I did what was required because I had a daughter of my own to protect, a husband who lacked the constitution for such choices, Eels, and an entire family that would have shattered had I waited for his resolve. Your mother made her own decision. She chose you, and I honored that choice more than you could possibly know. I never suggested the procedure for her, Eels. The only thing I demanded was her silence. She denied me. So I went to her. I told her a story I was certain she would understand, and I asked her again. And that time she complied. She ceased her campaign. Your father removed you from his will, Eels. She passed away. That is the chronology of what happened. You are free to loathe me for it. You have certainly earned that privilege. But feigning an inability to comprehend it, Arya, you are not a simpleton, Eels. You have spent a single week within that man's world, and you have already started to grasp what it takes to protect what is yours. You simply have the benefit of a more fashionable coat while doing it. A heavy silence filled the space. Eels. You believe we are alike? Arya said. I believe we will be, when all is said and done. No, Arya, no. A tremor began deep within her, a tectonic disturbance in her own physiology. She rose from her chair. Eels. I have one final question for you, she said. Ask it. The other woman, the one who came before my mother. Eels. Do you still have her name? Vivian observed her for a long-waited moment. Yes, she confirmed. You will provide it to me. And for what reason precisely would I do that? Because, Arya explained. Eels. I will acquire the information whether you assist me or not. If you give it to me, that is one outcome. If I must find it without you, I will construct the most devastating narrative possible about what you did to her. Eels. That narrative will be released to the public and it will solidify into history. Give me the name. I will make no promises of kindness in its use. I will, however, promise to be accurate. Eels. The phantom of what could have been a smile appeared on Vivian's mouth. It was not a smile, it was an echo, the expression of a predator recognizing a younger version of itself mastering the art of the hunt. Her name, Vivian stated, was Ines Marin. Eels. Arya committed the name to memory. She did not write it down. She did not speak it. Is she still living, she asked. I possess no information. You have no information. I have not kept track of her life, Arya. I compensated her to disappear. Eels. She disappeared. Our transaction was complete. Thank you, Vivian. For what? For finally providing me with one verifiable piece of deal. Arya exited the restaurant, no backward glance, no sign of haste. Her stride was different now, Eels. Something she had learned in the past week. The walk of someone who no longer needs to hurry, because the world had finally calibrated itself to her own internal rhythm. Outside, the sidewalk was cold. The winter light was unforgiving, Eels, rendering the building stark and two-dimensional. A man brushed against her shoulder, muttered an apology. She registered no reaction, no reflexive cringe from the unexpected contact. She filed that observation away. It was a new development. Eels. The black car was waiting on the corner. She entered. Volkov remained silent. He did not need to speak. He appeared to grasp, with some primal awareness, that silence was the only thing the moment demanded. Eels. He drove clear of the financial district's towers, tracing the river and taking the extended route north toward the house. This was because Lucian had, at some point, issued a standing directive. Eels. Never use the most direct path when she is in the vehicle after a difficult meeting. The thought surfaced somewhere along the waterfront. The river seemed to be a place for such realizations. Eels. She understood that Lucian had been erecting an entire infrastructure of small, intentional comforts around her, all of which had gone unnoticed. The long journey home, the secondary cell phone, the key Katya handed her on the first night, heals, his studied avoidance of physical contact, the ceramic mug in that ruined office, the dark green dress on Wednesday, selected to convey power, not to be a costume. Heals, the way he inquired every morning. Heals, if she had slept, and how he consistently paused for her reply before proceeding to any other topic. These gestures were not love. She understood love was not a support system. Love was the structure one might erect upon that system, heals, should it prove to be sound. But the scaffolding itself, she now saw, was the first thing anyone had ever taken the time to construct for her. Tears were already forming by the time they reached the gate. It was not a violent, messy sobbing. It was a quiet, heals, relentless flow of water she made no effort to wipe away. Volkov met her eyes in the mirror once and asked with immense delicacy, "Should I circle the block once more, Miss Vance?" "No," she replied. "Thank you. Take me inside." Heals. The house stood in the foyer, a constant presence waiting for her after every sortie into the world. No inquiries were made. Katya's arms lifted almost imperceptibly, an offer, not a demand, and after a moment that felt suspended in time, heals. For exactly 1 minute, Katya held her, not a second longer. A minute was the maximum duration of contact R could tolerate. "There is soup on the stove," Katya announced. "Is he here? In the library? Does he know?" Heals. "He has made a career of discerning things through closed doors, Miss Vance. He understands the shape of what happened. He is only lacking the details." "Okay." She walked toward the library. He was standing by the window, not at his desk. Heals. His hands were deep in his pockets, his attention fixed on the driveway she had just crossed, because he had, she now knew, been listening for the sound of the car. He turned as the door clicked closed. He had no need to ask. "Inez Marin," she said. Heals. "Spell the name." She did so. He produced his phone, sent one, the device vanish. "Tomorrow," he said. "Volkov and 2 of his people have a location, alive or dead. Where, when, and with whom. You will receive the report before I do," Heals, "and you will be the one to decide what happens next." "Okay, Arya, yes, how are you?" She looked at him. Her lips began to form the old reflex, the shield she had presented to the world for years. "I'm fine." Then she paused. Heals. Because a new truth was settling in. He was not the kind of man to whom you could give that answer. Heals. Not because he would challenge the falsehood, but because he would accept it as truth. And she realized in that instant that she did not want to be believed. "I'm not fine," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "No." Heals. "She told me she paid for an abortion for another woman, before my mother was in the picture. She told me she used that fact to control my mother. She said my mother interpreted it as a direct threat against me." Heals. "Which is why she stopped pressuring my father about the will, and why my life unfolded as it did. She told me that eventually I would understand, that I would become just like her, that we are identical. You are not. I know that we are not." Heals. "Are you certain?" Her eyes snapped to his. "Why would you ask me that?" "Because," he said, "you are standing in the house of a man who, by most metrics, is not so different from the people who did this to you." Heals. "You are learning to assess a room. You are learning to select the room. You are learning how to enter a building and not exit until your objective has been neutralized. I am not disputing that a transformation is occurring." Heals. "I am asking you, because who else will, if you are sure of your destination?" She sank down to the floor. Right there, in his library, she simply sat on the rug in her camel coat, because her legs had forgotten their function as pillars. Heals. She pressed the heels of her hands into her eyes, concentrating on the basic act of breathing. "I don't know," she whispered. "I don't know. I don't know, Lucian. Okay. I don't know if I'm evolving into someone I want to be," Heals, "or just into the person I was always fated to become." Heals. "I don't know if there is a distinction. I left that restaurant feeling proud of how I managed her. Then I got into the car and I considered how she would have been proud of how I managed her." Heals. "And it hit me that the one person whose validation I was seeking is the woman who just confessed to threatening my mother on her deathbed. I don't know how to reconcile those two thoughts." He did not approach her, did not join her on the floor. Heals. She felt that absence through a haze of confusion, and she understood the reason for it. His proximity would have been a comfort, and comfort in that moment would have been a deception, a retreat from the very paradox she needed to confront. Heals. He held his position. He allowed her to sit on the floor and face it. Heals. I do not believe you are becoming her, he stated, once the silence had assumed its own weight. I believe you are becoming someone capable of her actions when necessity dictates, which is an entirely different pathology, feels. Vivienne is a creature of terror, a lifelong fear of losing her station in the world. You are not animated by a fear of losing status. You began with none to lose. Your engine is a fear of being unseen, and so, feels. You are constructing a world for yourself where invisibility is no longer possible. They are different machines, Arya, driving vehicles that may appear identical, but their engineering is fundamentally distinct. A laugh, involuntary and sharp, feels broke from her. A superior analysis, she admitted, to my own. It has occupied my thoughts. Feels. Since when? She asked. Since the meeting with your father. Since you responded good when I warned you of the ugliness to come. I have considered it every day since. Was I shaping you, or was I merely witnessing you shape yourself? Feels. I concluded it was the latter, approximately 2 nights ago. And your certainty? Complete. Good. Good. Had you claimed absolute certainty, I would have recognized the deception and been forced to leave. Noted. Feels. She remained on the floor for another minute before rising. The movement lacked grace. She used a chair's arm to lever herself upright, wiping at her face with the fabric of her coat. Feels. She then moved to the window to stand beside him. There was no physical contact, only a shared gaze upon the same dark driveway of her arrival. Lucian, yes, I am going to marry you. He did not react. For a long, suspended moment, Feels, he was a study in stillness. Then, with deliberate slowness, he turned his head to face her, and she witnessed something beneath his calm exterior she had never seen. It wasn't shock, nor was it relief. It was a quiet, Feels, profound focus, the expression of a man who has navigated miles of a razor's edge and has just found solid ground beneath him. When? He asked. Not immediately. Not this month. But it is the act I will perform. I need you to know this, Feels, because I need you to cease formulating plans that account for my departure. Feels, you will make different choices if you know I am a fixed point. Arya, yes. You do not have to say that to elicit different choices from me. I know. I was already making them. I know, Lucian. I am stating it because it is a fact. Feels. He held her gaze for a long, quiet interval. Okay, he said, his voice a low vibration. Okay, I am, he continued. His voice now rougher, more raw than a moment before, going to require a minute. Take it. And he took it. Feels. He simply stood by the window, a hand on the sill, the other lost in a pocket, and she did not observe him. She understood, with a deep instinct, that he had experienced few moments such as this, and a man of his nature does not wish to be witnessed within one. Feels. She just stared out at the drive. Feels. The subject observed the last light failing through the trees. She monitored the asset Volkov. His pacing on the grounds a constant, a phone an extension of his ear. Her thoughts turned to the woman. Feels. Eins Marin, a phantom now given substance in the calculus, her existence about to be fundamentally altered by the two figures in this quiet, fortified espace. Then the man Lucian spoke. There is an information deficit, he said, concerning me. A pause. Feels. A breath suspended in the room. Before the month ends, it will be filled. This is a condition of your proposal, not a consequence. Her question, what is it? His answer, something bad. Her assessment, is it worse than my existing hypothesis? Feels. His correction was clinical. Not worse. She let the point rest. Then inform me when you inform me. Feels. Her posture shifted, a subtle recallogating of the spine. Her gaze met his and held. The way she scanned Lucian was less a look than an appraisal, a clinical inventory of details. The trace of ink at his forearm where a cuff had shifted, the severe, Feels, unforgiving line of his jaw, the trespass of silver at his temple she had not previously processed. For an instant, her mind separated from the act of feeling, an observation cleared of emotional static. You are a man of consequence, Feels, and you are offering me the choice to know that history. This is the quality that separates you from Vivienne. This is the reason I will never become her then. The directive came, Lucien. Yes. Locate her and do it with haste. Feels. I must establish contact before Vivienne can. His question was a scalpel. You believe she will act on this? Her analysis was immediate. Vivienne provided that name to prevent me from giving it to another. My assessment is she will call Enos tonight. Feels. The window of opportunity closes in 12 hours, perhaps less, before our target disappears. He observed her, his confirmation a single sharp nod, a very precise assessment, then a promise. I will dispatch Vulov in the morning. Feels. Her correction was swift, absolute. Send him tonight. She used his name like a key turning in a lock, forestalling any argument. Lucian, he conceded, lifting the phone. Vulov was mobilized that night. The vehicle departed at 20:30 hours. Heels. From the steps, Arya tracked the twin red taillights as they bled into the dark, consumed by the gate. The other woman, Katya, materialized at her side, draping a shawl across her shoulders in a silent, anchoring gesture. From a second-floor window, Heels, Lucien observed them both. Heels. In some city, on some street, the target, Ines Marin, was about to be visited by a powerfully built man in a dark coat, an operative who would prove the kindest man to arrive at her door in 11 years, who would gently inform her that a young woman she had never met, Heels, had a desperate need to speak with her, prepared to make the journey, and would arrive without legal counsel. That night, Arya did not sleep. She remained in the library with Lucian until the clock approached 0300, not working, Heels, not truly conversing, but sharing the protracted, quiet unwinding of a day. At some point, she became aware that her hand was on his forearm, resting over the tattooed script she still could not decipher. She had no recollection of the gesture, Heels, and he made no motion to withdraw. The contact remained unspoken, a communication that required no language. Outside, the black skeletal architecture of the trees stood frozen against the drive. The house seemed to inhale around them, Heels. Elsewhere in the silent structure, Katya nursed a small measure of liquor, her thoughts on the woman about to willingly walk into the dark center of the family's foundational sin, Heels. And on the 7th floor of a downtown high-rise, a woman adorned in pearls stared at an unexpected message on her screen. Her hand, for the first time in a very long time, had begun to tremble. The communication from Volkov arrived at 0400, Heels. Arya had finally succumbed to exhaustion on the library couch, one hand still in faint contact with Lucian's arm, her head canted at an unnatural angle against the leather. Lucian had not stirred, Heels, having at some point draped his own coat over her like a shroud. When the phone vibrated on the table, he intercepted it before the second pulse, moving with a fluid quiet to the window so the noise would not disturb her. For 40 seconds, Heels. Vulov's voice filtered through, low and clipped in Russian. Lucian offered a single reply, then placed him on hold. Heels. A new voice emerged on the line, a woman's. The exhaustion and fear were audible signatures in her tone. Lucian listened for a long period, offering no words. At last he spoke. "Thank you, Miss Marin. Your position is understood, Heels. We will await your decision." He terminated the call. "She's alive," he stated simply. "Where?" "2 states away. A small town. She has worked as a nurse for 9 years, living under her own name. She has 2 children, Heels, 7 and 9. They are not of your father's line. The man's name is Reyes." A knot of tension formed in Arya's chest. Reyes? Not the Reyes of our acquaintance. An entirely different family. A common name. I have verified it. Are you certain? Heels. Vulov photographed the marriage and birth certificates while kneeling on her kitchen floor. A different place of birth. A different history for the last 4 years. The intelligence is solid, Arya. Heels. I understand. She requires 24 hours to consider a meeting. I understand. She wants it known before any decision is made that she bears you no hatred. She stated it twice. She made Vulov promise he would tell me to tell you, Heels. Arya pressed her eyes shut. Okay, K. It was the only word she could formulate. Lucian took a seat on the far end of the couch, maintaining the distance between them. He allowed the space to exist. Carefully, Heels. She leaned across it and rested her head on his shoulder, an offering of trust he did not decline. They remained that way for a considerable time in silence. Outside, the sky began its slow, bruised transition from black to the first, Heels, spectral blue of dawn. Heels. Ines Marin consented to see her on a Thursday. Arya began the trip on Wednesday, flanked by Lucien and Vulov for the transit, yet she covered the final leg of the journey in solitude. This was the single condition she refused to compromise. Heels. Lucien had objected only once, citing procedure rather than safety. But when her voice turned absolute, "No, Lucien, I do this part by myself," his arguments ceased and his contingency planning began. Her hotel stood 3 blocks from the house. Heels. Vulov would be stationed 2 streets over, out of sight. A silent alarm on her phone could summon them to the door in under 4 minutes. They met in the kitchen, by Ines's design. Kitchens, she had reasoned, Heels, are less complicated spaces for encountering a stranger. She was a diminutive woman, smaller than Arya's imagination had allowed, her dark hair showing the first signs of silvering at the temples. Her face, once lovely, Heels, had been weathered by time into something more complex. Heels. She was dressed in hospital scrubs, the fabric still crisp from her shift. Her hands appeared chapped, scoured by 1,000 clinical washings. On the refrigerator, alphabet magnets pinned up children's artwork, and the air carried the faint feels, layered scents of garlic and clean laundry. She poured coffee for both of them, placing the milk on the table as a neutral ground. "I was not aware the money was connected to your mother," Eanes stated, shattering a profound quiet. "I knew of the wife, feels. I understood she was the source of the offer, but I never knew another woman was woven into the narrative, and I certainly did not know about a child. Not about you. Not then. When did you learn of my existence?" "About a year later," feels. "It was a photograph in the newspaper, the society pages. Gregory Vance with a young girl at some charity function. The caption read simply, 'Daughter.' I stared at that child, and I ran the calculus in my mind, and in that moment I understood." Feels. "I remained on my kitchen floor for a great while that day." "I'm so sorry. No, that is not a burden for you to carry." Arya placed her cup aside. "Vivian informed me," she began, her tone subdued, "that you consented to the procedure." "I did." Feels. "She told me you signed documents." "I signed documents. Did she coerce you?" Eanes regarded her for a long, unwavering moment. Her voice was steady. "She never did anything that would register to a lawyer. She came to my small apartment," Feels, "and she occupied my only chair. And then she explained with a chilling kindness that if I were to refuse her money and her proposal, she would ensure 3 outcomes." Feels. "First, she would see to it that the hospital sponsoring my visa would not renew it. Second, she would guarantee that my brother's pending immigration case would be summarily denied. And third, she would make certain that the child, Feels, should I decide to have it, would be born bearing my surname." And she said this with a slight smile, as we both understood the social weight of a name like mine against another. She detailed all of this while drinking the coffee I served her, Feels. When she departed, a check was left on my table. The sum was significant. "Eanes, I intend to make a move against her. I know. I saw your photo in the paper last week, the green dress. I pointed it out to my husband. He asked me who you were." Feels. "I told him. I believe that is the girl who is going to address the woman who sat in my kitchen 11 years ago. He simply replied, 'Good. He isn't aware of the particulars. He has no need to be.' Would you consider testifying?" "Regarding what?" Feels. "Any part of it. A deposition, a recorded account. The exact form is still unknown. I am only asking about your willingness, should it become necessary." Eanes drew a deep, rattling breath. "I have 2 children," she said. "I'm aware." Feels. "They don't know about the first one. I am aware of that as well. I cannot appear on the front page of a newspaper, Arya. I am a nurse. I reside in a small community. My existence here is quiet. If that quiet is shattered, my children bear the consequences." Feels. "And I will not subject them to thy understand." "However," Arya's gaze snapped upward. Feels. "However," Eanes continued, "if a method exists to utilize what I possess anonymously, I will give it all to you. I have the check, the card she presented to me. I have the clinic's name, the physician, the date." Feels. "And I have a letter she mailed me 6 months later, instructing me to never contact her again. I saved everything. For 11 years I have stored it in a box beneath my bed, never quite understanding why. I understand now." Feels. Tears were carving silent trails down Arya's face. She made no move to wipe them. "Thank you," she said. "Do not thank me yet. Use it." "I will," Arya vowed, "in a manner that does not transform you into her." Ina's expression sharpened at the implication. Feels. What followed was not merely information. It was a warning. It was offered because no one else would ever offer it, and because her mother, here Enos's breath faltered, because from all I have gathered of your mother, I believe this is what she would impart. Feels. People like Vivian Ashford do not manifest from nothing. A terrible thing was once done to her, and she vowed it would never be done to her again. That is their origin story, every one of them. Do not become her, Arya. Do not perpetuate the cycle. Feels. Be the one who breaks the pattern, not the one who masters it. The difference is subtle. It is a choice you will have to reaffirm every day for the rest of your life. Arya remained silent for a considerable time. "I'll try," she finally said. Feels. "The trying is the entire endeavor." Feels. For another hour they spoke of minor things, of Ines's children, of her husband, a mechanic, who navigated his life blessedly ignorant of these undercurrents and would continue to do so. They discussed the tomato plants in her garden, Feels, cultivated with more affection than expertise. When Arya finally rose, signaling her intent to leave, Eanes pulled her into an embrace. It was a brief, angular pressure of bone against cloth. No tears were shed by either woman. The gesture held no grace, heels. Yet it was the most genuine contact Arya had experienced from another woman since her mother's funeral. Eanes held her by the shoulders at the door. "One final piece of data," she said. "Your mother never signed those papers for financial gain, heels. I have seen the settlement. I have seen the waiver. Your father's family wants you to believe she exchanged his name for currency. She did not. Heels. She signed it as it was the only way to keep you. That was the singular, non-negotiable term. They first attempted to buy her silence, offering a fortune for her to simply vanish, but she refused. So they withdrew the money, placed the document before her, heels, and presented her with an ultimatum. Sign this, or we take the child. So she signed. It is never where the terms were framed to her in that way. But Vivian was. Arya's fingers dug into the doorframe, heels, her knuckles stark white against the wood. How can you be certain of this? The same lawyer they employed against her was later used against me. He confessed it years later, drunk at a conference in some distant city. Guilt, you see, heels, is an ailment without a cure. I do not possess his sworn affidavit. He is dead now. Heels. But I possess the truth. I have borne the weight of its certainty for years. Your mother did not sell you, Arya. She purchased you, with everything she had remaining in the world. On the steps outside, a raw sob tore from Arya's throat. Eanes allowed it, heels, holding her again for a moment before turning her gently to face the street. Go now, Anne said. Go be her daughter. Arya departed. The flight home was void of sound. Lucienne did not probe. Vulov did not probe. Heels. Arya watched the world below recede into blackness, contemplating what Eanes had said about the woman who halts the cycle and the woman who wins the game. She held this concept to the dim cabin light for the duration of the flight, and she decided, heels, somewhere above a state whose name she did not know, that she would be both, heels. She had no sense of whether such a thing was even achievable. They landed in the dark. Kachaka had prepared soup. Arya consumed 2 bowls and slept for 10 hours. Upon waking, she understood precisely what her next move must be, heels. She would not initiate a lawsuit. This was the first decision, the one that rendered Lucienne speechless. It was also the one that, in the ensuing weeks, would ignite a cold, controlled fury among several of his attorneys. Heels. She would not take her father to court over the trust. She would not take Vivian to court over Ines. She would not take Reyes to court for any reason. She went to the board. Vance Holdings possessed a board of directors, 9 individuals, heels. 4 were loyalists to Gregory, 5 were not. Arya had spent 2 weeks sequestered with Lucienne's lawyer, a woman named Helen Park, dissecting the life of each member, every filing, every vote, every buried animosity. Heels. When Arya entered that boardroom on a Tuesday morning, the 5 were already aligned with her. She wore the dark green dress. Helen Park stood at her side. She possessed the trust documents. She had a summary, composed in starkly simple language, heels, of the 9 years of withdrawals her father had made from her mother's funds. She had a sealed envelope with a notarized statement from Ines. Her name was omitted, but every artifact from the box under the bed was catalogued. The check, the card, heels, the letter. She had the medical records her father sent, the actual cost of saving her mother, and a summary of what Gregory had spent from that same trust, that same year, on a yacht. She spoke for 23 minutes. Her voice remained level. Heels. She did not cry. She concluded by placing a single piece of paper onto the polished expanse of the table. Heels. This, she said, her voice cutting the silence, is my proposal. I am not petitioning this board for the removal of my father as chairman. I am not asking for the recovery of his acquisitions. I am demanding 3 actions. 1. Effective today, heels. The trust will be removed from the administration of any individual with the Vance name and transferred to an independent trustee. 2. A public apology, authored by him and reviewed by me, conceding that my mother, Eleanor Cassidy, heels, was denied her due support, and that the failure was his, not hers. 3. Vivian Ashford is to resign her seat on the advisory committee of this company, quietly, with effect inside of the month. No public announcement will be necessary. Heels. The atmosphere in the boardroom had the density of granite. It was Whitford, the elder statesman of the board, and a contemporary of her mother, who first fractured the silence. And what if we refuse? To which Arya responded, heels. Then the contents of this folder, indicating the documents before them, will be delivered to 3 specific journalists who have been pursuing me this past week. I will offer no commentary. The paper will articulate its own narrative, heels. You are aware of what it says. You have had 20 minutes to absorb its implications. I do not covet his position, Mr. Whitford. I seek the restoration of my mother's name. I require the removal of my stepmother, Eels, and I demand that which is rightfully mine be liberated from his control. This is the sum of my terms, Eels. Should you consent, this affair remains within these walls. That, too, is a condition. Whitford's gaze performed a swift, telling inventory of the faces around the table. The 5 she had meticulously chosen returned his look, their resolve unyielding, Eels. It required, Arya observed with a surgeon's detachment, approximately 4 seconds for him to recalibrate his understanding of the new power structure. The board, he stated at last, will take this matter under advisement, Eels. We shall provide our answer by morning. That is acceptable, Arya affirmed. She stood. I thank you for your time. The line was a practice thing, delivered with the dispassionate calm of a procedural expert. She exited. In the corridor, Eels. Helen Park's expression held a trace of profound respect. They will capitulate, Helen predicted. I am aware. You truly don't want his role. The chairman's seat is a cage. It would mean 2 decades of playing his part. Eels. My father never performed a single day of authentic work in his entire life. Eels. I prefer to construct something of my own. A wise position. I have had excellent instruction this last month. They emerged into the city's air. The car awaited. Arya settled into the seat. Eels. Her body held in perfect stillness for the long journey home. Only just commencing the slow, agonizing process of releasing a tension maintained for 6 uninterrupted hours. The board consented. It took them 10 hours, not the promised overnight, Eels. Whitford's call came at 6 the next morning, his tone threaded with meticulous apologies regarding procedural necessities. Arya received it all without comment. The trust was transferred before the week's end. Gregory composed the apology, Eels. She forced 2 revisions until her mother's name was echoed 4 times in 4 successive sentences, a statement that, for a man of Gregory Vance's nature, was the closest he could ever come to genuine remorse. Eels. Vivian tendered her resignation from the committee. There was no public announcement. She executed the move on a Tuesday via email, attributing it to personal reasons. 3 days later, a text from her materialized on Arya's phone. Eels. Was this truly necessary? Arya allowed the question to permeate the quiet of her apartment for a full hour. She then replied with surgical precision, Yes, I am sorry that it was. I am not sorry for my actions. She sent the message. Eels. Vivian never responded. For a considerable time after, they ceased to speak. The issue of Anton Reyes proved far simpler than anticipated. This was because, as Lucienne had noted on that initial evening, Anton Reyes was exceedingly fond of his kneecaps. Eels. The public statement about Arya had served its purpose. The photograph had served a more persuasive one. Eels. The transfer of the trust, a maneuver executed in private chambers but observed by the correct set of eyes, finalized the matter. One afternoon, Reyes dispatched an envoy to Lucienne's residence, Eels, a man in an impeccable suit with a voice like polished marble. They conferred in the library, the clock marking 45 minutes, and upon his departure, the man offered Lucienne's hand a brief, formal shake. In that moment, Eels, Gregory's debt was assimilated into Reyes's financial empire, with Arya's name never once gracing the ink of any document, Eels. Lucienne would later clarify that Reyes abandoned the marriage contract the instant he understood. Arya was not a commodity to be bartered, instead offering a more generous leash on the debt, Eels, as the only other option was conflict with a man he preferred not to engage. He is not a virtuous man, Eels, Lucienne informed her. Do not mistake the simplicity of this resolution for anything else. He is, however, a pragmatic man. Those are not the same thing. No. Is that what you are? I am a pragmatic man, Lucienne allowed, on the majority of days, Eels. On my very best days, I am something marginally better. And what constitutes the best version of you, Lucienne? He observed her, a profound silence expanding between them. You will witness it, I hope, if you remain to see it. Eels. I have already stated my intentions. I am going to marry you. So you have. My position has not altered. I have observed as much. He relayed the promised story 2 nights before the month's conclusion, in the library, Eels, when the house was deep in slumber, and the hour was exceptionally late. It was a narrative for which she could not have prepared. She had anticipated murder, a clandestine wife hidden from the world, Eels. She had braced for a confession of some wartime atrocity, an act performed on a parcel of land she could not locate on a map. What he offered instead was the barren clinical chronicle of his contract with a benefactor 12 years prior, Eels, an agreement born of a moment of acute desperation when his faculty for risk assessment was tragically underdeveloped. A single task was performed for this individual, Beals, and while the full architecture of the operation was unknown to him when he accepted, there was sufficient information even then for a man to discern the profound darkness within it. He accepted the payment, nonetheless, Beals. That single action became a pivotal stone in the avalanche that decimated a small family in a city they can no longer claim as home. Note, not their demise, but their absolute ruin. The father's enterprise turned to dust. Beals, the mother's health collapsed in its wake. Beals. There was a son, a boy now 17, who for the past 9 years has been the unwitting beneficiary of an education fund, established by Lucian through a foundation and disguised under the name of a third party, Beals. He presented these facts without any discernible tremor in his voice, offering no rationalization, no appeal for empathy. He concluded his account with a stark declaration: "The family has no knowledge of my involvement. They never will." Beals. I seek no credit for this. I provide this information because if we proceed as you suggest, you must know there is a boy in this country who will attend college because of something I did. A contract I never should have accepted, Beals. This is a debt I will carry to my grave. If this changes your calculus, if you wish to withdraw, I will make no attempt to dissuade you. Arya let the details settle into the prolonged quiet. Will the debt ever feel repaid to you? She asked finally. Beals. No. Good. Beals. If it ever felt repaid, Lucien, I would know you had forgiven yourself. Beals. I would invariably choose the man who understands his debt is perpetual over one who concludes he has paid his due. He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, something fundamental had shifted within them, Beals, a transformation for which she had no lexicon. Okay, he exhaled. Okay. 6 months thereafter, they were married in the house's garden in a quiet ceremony. Katya and Vulov were present, as was Helen Park, Beals. 2 of Lucian's most tenured associates served as witnesses, alongside one of Arya's, Mia, the barista from a coffee shop on Fifth Avenue, a friendship Arya had meticulously cultivated that spring, with Lucian's discreet assistance from the shadows, Beals. Mia cried unabashedly during the vows, though she scarcely knew the bride and had never met the groom. She was, precisely as Arya had calculated, an individual predisposed to tears at weddings, a response as involuntary as an allergy to pollen, Beals. Her mother's locket was fastened to the inside of her dress. Beals. Gregory was not in attendance. Beals. She had conducted a cold, exhaustive analysis of the costs and benefits associated with his presence. Ultimately, a letter was dispatched, not an invitation. It read, "I am marrying on the 20th. You are not to attend. I am, however, Beals, open to a meeting between us alone the following weekend." He consented 2 days later. The meeting occurred. They sat in the same tea shop she had selected for her meeting with Vivin. For 90 minutes, the words exchanged were brittle, Beals, charged with tension. He wept once. She did not. He concluded by asking if she could ever forgive him. She answered, "The outcome is undetermined. I will commence the attempt. Not for your sake, but for my own." Beals. This psychological liability is inefficient, and I have other burdens I must carry. Beals. You may resubmit the query in 1 year. He merely nodded. No physical contact was exchanged. He settled the bill for both teas, his motions precise, and then he departed. She did not return to the residence to weep. Beals. She returned and walked for a long time in the garden, observing the final light as it drained across the hedgerows. By the time she re-entered the house, she had achieved a state that was not forgiveness for him. Not yet, but was something more powerful. Beals. The understanding that in the past year she had become a woman whose own center of mass no longer relied on him transforming into someone else. She would reflect on that distinction for years, that it was not synonymous with forgiveness, that it was, Beals, in many respects, superior. Forgiveness is an affair between 2 people. The state she had discovered required only herself. Esseran did not attend the wedding either, but she sent a card, Beals, a small handwritten note bearing a single line. You accomplished it without becoming her. Beals. Your mother would have been so proud of you today. Arya archived the card, placing it in a box beneath her bed, a quiet echo of Ans's own impulse to catalog the past. The years that followed were not built on simple foundations. Beals. The firm Arya launched, a private investment boutique that operated mostly within the accepted lines of ethics, a phrase she had learned not to recoil from, expanded at a pace that frustrated accountants but alarmed her rivals. Beals. Her partnership with Lucian was marked by moments of stunning ferocity. An early contract was lost. a casualty of excessive caution, but it was a necessary misstep. Heels. She later secured a far larger one by learning to wield that same caution, not as a shield but as a finely honed weapon. She was learning to map the terrain between tactical fear and strategic risk. She made enemies. Heels. Some were kept, because certain adversaries provide a necessary function. Others were simply cut loose, deemed a poor allocation of resources and not worth the strategic upkeep. And over the slow turning of the years, Heels, she uncovered a particular and singular talent. It was not the one she had anticipated. It was not the ability to read the subtle currents of power in a room. She could do that, but it was a learned skill. Heels. It was not a flair for identifying undervalued assets, though she did that as well. The gift that was uniquely hers, latent all along, was a sharp, unerring instinct for finding young women who had been written off by their families, Heels, and directing capital to them before they even recognized their own potential. There were 5 in the first 2 years, 11 by the 5th, Heels. By the 10th year, the list approached 40. The work was a silent architecture. Her name appeared on nothing. It was all filtered through Helen Park's office, a ghost operation where the beneficiaries rarely knew the origin of the funds. Heels. This was by design. In fact, this was the entire point, because Arya finally understood that the inheritance her mother had left her wasn't financial. Her mother had given her a quiet, ferocious, Heels, deeply personal mandate to keep a child the world had instructed her to discard. The only way Arya could conceive of honoring such an act was to replicate it, quietly, often, indefinitely. In the end, she did not become Vivian, Heels. She had expended so much energy fearing that transformation that the very act of not becoming had solidified into a kind of daily ritual, Heels. And rituals, she had come to understand, are more binding structures than promises. She performed this ritual daily. Some days she failed. On those days, she would report the failure to Lucian, who, maintaining his own set of rituals, would simply nod, Heels. In the morning, they would both return to their work. Vivian Ashford lived for another 11 years. During that time, their paths intersected on 3 occasions, 2 of which were funerals for mutual acquaintances, Heels. The third was at a gallery opening where Arya had not expected to see her. A nod was exchanged across the crowded space. No words were needed, but at the end of the evening, as Arya was leaving, Vivian intercepted her by the coat check and said, Heels. Her voice a near whisper, the girl in the green dress from the papers all those years ago, Heels. That person was no longer you, was she? Arya allowed the question to occupy the space between them. No, she confirmed, the word delivered with precision. She was the first draft. There were others. This is the version I've chosen to preserve. Heels. Vivian offered a single spare nod. Good, she said, her tone a perfect vacuum between kindness and cruelty, before pulling on her coat and departing. Arya watched her go. There was no sense of victory. There was no feeling of loss. Heels. There was only the strange, sterile quiet of having finally outlasted a drama she had once mistaken for her entire world. It was with Celeste, of all people, that a stable connection was eventually forged. Not friendship, Heels. A friend was a role Celeste was structurally incapable of playing, Heels. But Celeste, in her late 20s, finally broke from the gravitational pull of the Vance family, moved across the country, and began to construct a life of her own. A year later, Heels. A long letter arrived, an apology for a litany of minor harms Arya had largely forgotten, and for a few monumental ones she never would. Arya's response was guarded, but it initiated a correspondence that unwound over nearly a decade. Heels. Celeste's first marriage was a predictable disaster. Her second was an improvement. From that union came a child, a daughter she named Eleanor, asking in a letter if that was permissible. The question unlocked something in Arya, Heels. A torrent of emotion that lasted for a single cathartic hour. She wrote back that it was, and for the rest of her days, she served as the girl's godmother, a distant but unwavering presence. Gregory Vance died in the 12th year after the gala. Heels. The end was not a shock. A long illness had been shadowing him for years. In his final 6 months, Arya found herself visiting with a frequency that surprised even her. They never achieved closeness. What they discovered in those last hours, Heels, was something that resembled peace. During her final visit, the day before the silence descended, his hand held hers for a long time, no words exchanged between them. At one point, he managed to breathe, "Your mother," but the thought remained suspended. Heels. Incomplete. He just looked at her, and in his eyes was an expression she chose after a moment to interpret as the apology his lips could never form. "I know, Dad," she said. He closed his eyes. She remained until the night nurse began her shift. Feels. At the funeral, she delivered a brief eulogy. It was not praise, nor was it condemnation. She spoke of her father as a man of complexity, one whose legacy included both profound wounds and small, quiet acts of grace. Feels. She acknowledged that for most of her life she had been defined by her rage against him, and that in his final months she had been trying, clumsily, to set that rage aside. To set it down, she clarified, was not to say it was unearned. Feels. She was setting it down because the cost of carrying it had come to outweigh its purpose. A calculation she felt her own practical mother would have understood. She did not cry during the speech. The tears came later, a silent deluge in the car. Feels, with Lucian beside her, saying nothing at all. Feels. They had 2 children. The first, a girl they named Eleanor, a deliberate mirror of her mother's name, an act of defiant self-reclamation on Arya's part. A boy followed 2 years later, named by Lucian for a maternal grandfather he'd never met. Feels. A ghost he had discovered in discarded letters in his late 20s. The children were raised within the stone house, a place that slowly transformed from his property into their shared world. Feels. Their childhood was not without flaws. No childhood is, but Arya ensured it was a space where the existence of love was never in question. That was the singular, non-negotiable foundation she was determined to build. Feels. On her 45th birthday, Arya is seated on the steps of the stone house with Lucian. Inside, the low thrum of a small party, their chosen family. Katya is still present, her age visible in the stiffness of her movements. Feels, though she still rejects any title of reverence. Volkov, 3 years into a retirement that was never fully embraced, continues his Sunday visits without fail. Mia now owns a bakery in the city. Feels. An enterprise funded by a loan Arya forced through after the banks had refused. Helen Park, now a senior partner at her firm, is engaged in a loud debate over wine with one of Lucian's nephews. Lucian hands Arya a glass of water, an old, Feels familiar gesture. He knows she favors it over champagne on this particular day. Feels. 30 minutes, he says. Just us. Then we return to the pack. It's an established pact. They sit in silence. The garden is saturated in the final light of a summer evening, as a moth flutters uselessly against the lamp beside the door. From inside, Feels. The sound of her daughter, Eleanor's laughter, erupts, a bright note likely sparked by something Volkov said. He always possessed a unique ability to make her laugh. Arya's mind drifts, as it often does in quiet moments, back to the girl in the navy dress. Feels. The adolescent who stood at the edge of the Hartley ballroom 22 years ago, staring at the chandeliers to avoid looking at the people. The girl with the trembling hands. The girl on the verge of being sold. The thought returns. Feels. A familiar ghost that has visited 1,000 times. I would go back for her if I could. Feels. And then comes the practiced correction, a path worn smooth in her consciousness. She reminds herself that it wasn't necessary. That girl saved herself. Feels. That girl accepted a stranger's hand. A statistically irrational risk that proved to be the only rational move available. The distinction between those 2 labels was a variable only she could perceive in that one, flickering moment. It was that girl, Feels. Her own past self, who was the true architect of her salvation, not Lucian, not even her mother. That girl, she thinks, is the source of the advice she would ever offer another young woman standing on the edge of a ballroom. You will not be rescued, Feels. Not in the way you have been taught to imagine. A hand might be offered, and taking it could be the correct course of action, and sometimes it may even lead to a good outcome, Feels. But the act of taking it, that is the only thing that truly matters. The person who takes it is the self you must then become, and you must inhabit that self for the remainder of your life. No one else can perform that function for you. Feels. A kind man or a cruel one can alter the room you occupy, but neither can decide if you are the kind of woman who traverses that room, or the kind who remains frozen at its edge. That power is yours. It was always yours. It will always be yours. Feels. She said this once to a small group of whom she sponsored. Afterward, one of them, so young, from a small town, her voice unsteady, asked, "Are you saying we have to do it all by ourselves?" Arya considered the question. Feels. No, she said. My point is that you are not permitted to do it in isolation, but you are also not permitted to bypass the part where you do it yourself. Both truths are concurrent. I received aid. You will receive aid. Feels. But you are still required to choose, in a single unobserved moment, to reject the role the world has assigned you. That moment will be small. It will not feel like a momentous destiny. It will feel like an instant where you perceive 2 paths, Feels, and you select the more arduous one. That instant is the entirety of it. There will be subsequent instants, subsequent choices, but that initial one is the doorway. Everything else is merely the house you construct after you have passed through it. Heals. She didn't realize at that moment, speaking those words, that she was merely presenting a clinical abstract of her own life story. The true understanding would arrive much later, in the quiet darkness, with the rhythm of Lucian's breathing beside her, heels, the howl of the wind, and the subtle groan of a floorboard as a child shifted in their sleep. It was then she grasped it. She had meticulously constructed the very existence that the girl in the navy dress never knew she was permitted to desire. Heels. The paradox, however, was that this life hadn't delivered safety. It had delivered something far more profound. It had forged her into an individual for whom safety was no longer a prerequisite for existence. Now, Heels, on the steps during her 45th birthday, she rests her head on Lucian's shoulder. "Are you happy?" he murmurs. It is his annual inquiry on this night. Heels. A ritual born from his observation that she seldom recognizes her own contentment unless it's reflected back at her. Heels. "Yes," she affirms. Heels. "I believe I am." "Good," Lucian replies. "Yes, thank you." "For what? For that first evening? The key? The circuitous route home? For preventing me from becoming her. You prevented yourself." "I know." Heels. "But you created the environment in which prevention became possible." "That is not the same thing. That is what counts." He says for a long moment before responding. Then, so quietly she almost misses it, he says, "You accomplished the same for me." Heels. "In the event you were unaware." She was aware, but the vocalization of the truth was still essential. They remain for the balance of their 30 minutes. Then they rise, their movements carrying the nascent stiffness of age, and return to the house. Heels. Eleanor is now at the piano, navigating a composition she has yet to master but will. Given time, she will. Heels. The boy sat on the floor, erecting a tower of blocks. Volkov was stretched out near him, a massive, watchful guardian. From the threshold of the kitchen, Katya feigned indifference to the scene. Helen, it seemed, had prevailed in the debate over the wine. Heels. For a beat, Arya simply stood, absorbing the tableau, and experienced for the 100th time the sheer impossibility of her own reality. The fact of how close she had come, a girl in a navy dress on an ordinary Tuesday, Heels, to becoming a mere entry in another man's financial records. The razor's edge she had traversed, and how she in turn had become that very line for other women to cross. She placed her hand on Lucien's back, a gentle anchoring gesture. Heels. She entered the room. Heels. Her domain was here at the nucleus of this world. Ultimately, it was not a seat of power or a diadem. It was no title inherited through a bloodline. It was a space filled with individuals she had selected, and who had in turn selected her. It was a life sculpted by her refusal, repeated over and over for 22 years, to become the woman society had prescribed for her. In every dimension that held meaning, this was sufficient. In every dimension that held meaning, this was the whole world.